Good morning, everyone, and good evening to those on stateside. Good to see everyone. Lukey, as always, first here. Good to see you, Tracy. Necro Kitty, nice to see you. Gary, maybe you all have fat, traditional, tribal well-wish, apparently. Yes, always. Why not? Why not? Yes, me rebooting. I won't put that up. I won't bother with that. Bill Gates bug. Yeah, good one. Actually, that's a better one. Amateur hour. Come on, Lamps. You're sounding like Blinky. That's a Blinky statement. There's only one Blinky troll, and where the fuck is he? Hasn't even popped up around. Still captive. Thank you, Richard. Pro starts a 5-minute lead. Computers are computers. Blame Bill Gates. He designed them. Well, actually, he didn't even design. Yeah, he actually acquired DOS for $50,000, and that's back then, which was a hell of a lot of money, like probably $500,000 or more. His parents had a bit of squid back then, so yes, all this sort of from rags to riches is a whole lot of baloney. Nothing like bacon. Yes, for me, bacon is one of my favorite foods. Nice. Why not? Why not? Work those muscles. Don't forget the leucine. No need for carbs. Yes, exactly. Actually, Laszlo Boris, the guy, that out of UCLA, the Hungarian guy that does a lot of the, as you could say, does research in deuterium, but also promotes a lot of that. He loves actually pork, especially, like bacon and stuff like that. He just basically lives off that stuff. And as he says, I'll, I hydrate my my body with bacon, or along those sort of lines in that regard. He actually turned up with some guys to do an interview, and he actually was trying to literally flog that guy's bacon, and that guy said, "You're not touching my bacon." It was just funny as hilarious. Yes. Yeah, I'm pretty good. It's nice and sunny outside, so you can actually see the sun come through. Sort of, it's not as low as last time was hitting me in the eyes, and really I had to put my sunnies on. It was that bad. So it's coming through. I mean, I'm close to the window. Even the other one, when I go to the other room, it's going to be even worse. I may have to actually, I'm not sure whether I'll have to wear sunnies in that room, because that one is just basically that where the stand-up desk will be right next to the window. This is slightly a bit further away. I'm still getting light come right across, but so I don't know how I'm going to manage that. Whether I have to, I don't want to be wearing sun. Anyway, you know what I mean. It's bad enough I've got the the Roy look in the evenings, let alone then it's going to be the cool sunny look. It'll be I'll get some Hawaiian nickname for that as well. Yes. Heaps of it. Nothing like the real stuff. Yes. Good muscle protein synthesis stuff. Anything over 2.6 grams is perfect. I love eggs. Look, I sometimes have too many and then I get sick and tired of them, but But generally, when I keep it to a sort of, like 3 or 4, yeah, I can handle that. It's when I start going into sometimes I have days where I think, I probably need a bit more cholesterol. I probably need a bit, more nutrition in that regard, and I may up it a bit, and then I do it for quite a long time. It's like anything, I like to I don't know, I get bored, with certain types of foods. It's simple as that. So I like to vary, I like to change. Um, you know, sometimes I'll have like a week where I'm just I need to get my tuna. I need to get some fish in, or some salmon or some stuff like that. And then I just go off it. I go, you know. I sort of listen to my body in my meat, in my animal food preferences. Seems to work pretty well. Ah, good to see you, mate. Ah, yes, exactly. Meat loving and sun loving. I suspect quite a lot of you aficionados. Yeah, it was actually quite nice. In the morning yesterday, it was a shit day. It was raining, pouring down, and eventually it cleared up. We went for a long walk, but I put a raincoat on, and it wasn't too bad. It was a bit windy in some areas, but then by the time we got down to Salamanca, it was nice and warm. The sun had come out and all that. And I'm going perfect. So no, I still in winter, even if it's pouring down, I'll put a raincoat on and get out there. Um, yeah, I think people, I don't know, we've become too domesticated. We need to get out in the elements. We need to harden up a bit. Very important for the body. Stuff you, Harry. Have your weather back. 9 degrees Celsius. Oh, poor Richard. Oh, he's suffering over there in Kiwi land. Mm. Hey, Harry from Canberra. Ah, Robbie, good to see you, mate. You guys get really cold mornings from what I hear. You know, absolute, like Canberra's, just surrounded by mountains, if nobody knows. Um, it's inland type. It's sort of not too. I mean, it's not. We're not talking about massive elevations here or anything like that. But it's interior, and it's just basically it's a funny sort of place. It's just full of roads and more roads and more roads. It's very unpedestrian friend. It's pedestrian unfriendly as a place. I haven't been there for I visited once, and that was once. I'm not going to comment beyond that before I lose Robbie. Unsubscribe, fucking hates Canberra. It's not the best place in the world. Let's put it that way, Robbie. You know what I mean. I'm coming to Tassie in September. Sounds good. Can't wait to get there and have a good food and have some good food. Yeah, we have got some really good food down here. Yeah, it gets very cold. Yeah, Canberra is the capital of Australia for people that think Sydney is. uh, G'day, Gary. And 30 WA. Yes, the warm place. Yes, I get that from Blinky. He always crows about WA and your great weather. Imkers. What is the energy of fat utilization from carnivore versus keto? 40% carnivores, 65%. Look, fat is a strange thing. Like carbohydrates, I mean, I know people sort of look at even the calorie stuff, which we talk about energy in this on this channel, not about calories, but even calories in terms of calories, it varies. Like carbohydrates, everybody thinks they're 4, but, when you look at certain types of like soluble, insoluble, you know, something that goes through you, 0. The other stuff can, provide you with a few grams, with at least 1 gram. But when it comes to protein is really, depending on its composition, it's around 4, but it, can be as high as 4.44. When you look at saturated fats, some saturated fats, like you find in cocoa butter, are 5.5. Some are down to 5. So, DHA you can't actually oxidize, but it's 9.3 if you put it in a bomb calorimeter. And that's the funny thing, 9.3. But if you put it in the body, you can't even oxidize it in the mitochondria. So it's not energy, it's structural material. So it's like anything. A lot of this sort of stuff is, there are so many variations between the fatty acids that they vary. Like a lot of the high PUFA in seed oils, especially things like linoleic acid and stuff like that, they tend to be up to 9.1 calories. This is from a bomb calorimeter, which your body isn't a bomb calorimeter, and it's a closed system, not a, your body doesn't function like that. It's hormonally driven and depends on the sort of composition of the macronutrients and stuff like that. I'm getting some images from Lukey. It's Lukey presenting. Bloody hell, Lukey, you've been busy, mate. You've been busy. Oops. I think I've got them all. I think. Now hold on. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 2, 4, 6. Yep. I've got them all. We'll have a bit of entertainment, then we'll come back. Sorry about this, Mr. Kerr. This is how we operate on this channel. We have to entertain ourselves a bit as well. And the first one from Lukey. Sugar apologism, repeat follower, actual effects of sugar. Nice one, Lukey. And the repeat cockwombles. We want to try this new method of execution. Repeat lecture, volume 1. It's a killer. It's a real killer. Harry explodes. Anyone talking shit about dairy, Harry? Looks like Grand Theft Auto. Is that out of that? All is well and ends well. Yes, one of my favorite games. Carbs increase your T levels, so what means you're healthier? But T3 is isolation means nothing. You will just get glycated and sick. Yes, very much so. Very much so. We need to. This is the Grandma Peters. We need to get carbs for proper hormonal health. Sure, Grandma. Now let's get you to bed. Exactly. All those carb loading, kibble eating grandmas who are basically protein deficient, fat, good quality fat are lacking in their diet and cannot even get off their asses, which is staggering. indictment on our current thinking. And when you look at people like the Maasai, who eat a very high saturated fat and animal-based diet of meat and milk. And remember Mary Ruddock trying to race up a 80-year-old up a hillside, and she's in her mid-40s and she couldn't keep up. Look at the difference. Say no more. Yes, the repeat cockwombles have got no idea. Vegan ideology. Human beings being carnivorous. Yes, exactly. Ah, very nice, Lukey. Thanks for the laughter. Look, I suspect what you mean is basically it all has to do with hormones, and it all has to do with the macros you put in. Obviously, if you don't put any sugar in there, your utilization will be very good of fat because you'll be activating hormone-sensitive lipase, which basically means you will be accessing that stored fat around your gut, and you'll be taking anything in. So energy flux in the system depends on hormonal signaling. So if you put carbs in, you're going to push up insulin, push down glucagon, and the body says, we don't need to produce gluconeogenic precursors, so we stop that. And we don't need to basically, because remember, when glucagon goes up, you still need hormone-sensitive lipase to allow the production of glucose. So you need fat because you need the backbone of the triglyceride, which is the glycerol, to basically for that gluconeogenic process. So the reality is, when you're taking it in, you're going to be shutting that down because you've got a different energy substrate that's coming in. So it's not a question of, this sort of nonsense about utilization. There's not a lot of energy in basically sugar. That is why many athletes, the old athlete bonking is basically running out of energy. Can't tap into your fat. Your insulin's too high because you've been carb loading and you've been taking in a whole lot of those fluids, and you've got super high insulin. You're signaling saying, well, we got, shuts down that whole system, and it takes a while for that sort of to reset, even in an athlete. And that's why current athletes that are doing long distance running and stuff like that, who are fat adapted, they're able to tap into shitloads of energy around their waist and do not have this problem. So absolute difference between the way energy is utilized. I view it as energy utilization rather than all this sort of nonsense that we tend to peddle around in that regard. And it's hormonal signaling that actually tells the body whether to shut down the use of one thing and turn on the use of other things and stuff like that. So people on a SAD diet will have very poor utilization of their own fat stores, and if basically they're having an excess amount of energy coming in, they'll also basically engage the Randall cycle and cause a blockade and a down regulation, because mallow-CoA will go up and basically blockade those, receptors, from taking in, and will basically not be able to utilize that energy. So the cells are going to be, not taking up anything, and you're going to have a lot of circulating stuff, and that's what we call blood sugar and blood fats going up, triglycerides in the bloodstream, when you do your tests and stuff like that. But in terms of utilization, it's a dynamic system that's influenced by what substrates of energy you're putting into your body, and what basically hormonal effects are being influenced. So it's a very dynamic system. It's not something static that anybody tells you it's static, they're talking shit. they're talking garbage. It's a dynamic system. And even, if you want to get really quickly fat adapted, you do like a 24-hour dry fast, and that really gets you, and it's some exercise with it, and it clears out your glycogen very, very fast, and puts you into ketosis very quickly and in really good utilization. And remember, once you do that, also your body's actually freeing up a lot of, fats to be utilized to hydrate as well. Remember, fat provides more water hydration, 1.1 for every gram, 1.1 mil. So you get 10% more. Sugar dehydrates you. You only get about 0.44. So you're losing massive amounts of water. It's part of the sort of, system of deuterium depletion that's actually happening. So it's clearing out that, because the body needs to get rid of it because it's toxic to the mitochondria. It's damaging the neutrons in that sort of stuff. So we've got to be very careful. So when it comes to utilization of fat, it can vary quite a bit, mate, in that regard. And it depends on the types of composition of the fats, how they are utilized. Stearic acid and palmitate tend to also induce reverse electron transport in the mitochondria through complex 1, which basically means that they can actually signal the cell to increase the biogenesis of new mitochondria. So the density can go up over time, which can change the sort of the utilization of energy. So there's so many things at play. So it's a very complex picture in that regard. So, and it depends what you're trying to do. It varies. If you're trying to lose fat as well, you want to utilize more of your body fat rather than the putting stuff in. So you go a bit more higher protein to cut, like the old bodybuilders used to do. It's well-known information. It's just people are being confused by too much garbage out there, which is the biggest problem. Sad diet, if you're calorically restricting, you utilize that, and you probably won't engage the Randall cycle, and you'll probably use most of it. But it depends on the source as well. If it's from seed oils, it'll be very high in deuterium, which will really be taxing your mitochondria and doing a lot of damage over time. So it depends on the sources. So that's what most sad dieters get: refined sugars and refined oils, which are very high in deuterium, and they slowly but surely over time. And also, they do not have a lot of palmitate and stearic acid, those foods, which means they do not help with the initiation of a new biosynthesis of mitochondria. So they're not only not encouraging the body to produce more mitochondria, but they're actually destroying a lot of the existing mitochondria and mitochondrial density over time, which explains why people become sicker, weaker, less effective, and all that. Fasted carnivore, 95% energy from fat, said Ida. Look at even a sad dieter, if they become keto adapted, fasting in a low carbohydrate in a low carbohydrate diet is slightly different than somebody a sad dieter. Somebody that is a sad dieter, they will deplete glycogen. They will basically adjust in that regard, but it won't be, like a panacea. They'll get some benefits, but nothing massively. They're still putting a lot of stuff that is causing a lot of reactivity in the body, is creating far more reactive oxygen species, because when you're pushing a lot of high energetic, compounds, protons through the actual complex one due to consuming pretty much a very high carbohydrate diet, you're going to create a lot more reactive oxygen species compared to, to basically fat. Even fat creates all oxidation causes a bit. The difference is that in a low insulin state, you upregulate glutathione, intracellular antioxidant, which basically protects you. So the very small amount that is produced by fat oxidation is mitigated largely by glutathione upregulation. So it's less of an issue that's why people see reactive protein and all these things go down as well. So a long-winded thing, but there's a lot of moving parts. I see things in a very holistic way. You'll get that as you follow me. You'll realize my thinking is very erratic and holistic. Slagging us Kiwis because we keep up beating you at sports. We'll have none of that, Andrew. We don't want to upset them too much. They'll run away. It's okay with Bart. I can do it. And with basically Richard, they're okay. They'll take it. They dish out quite a bit as well. So expect a lot from Bart K. If he turns up, he's probably gone for a walk. He may turn up on the evening one. I sent him both links. He said if he's got time, he will, but maybe later on. Sometimes he pops in and says hello. You can slag off Ted then and see what sort of response you get. Incoming barrage. Yeah, I noticed. Bloody hell, mate. There's a few there. Good ones. Very good. Very good. We have hardly had any sun in spring and summer. Well, Tasmania hasn't been too bad, lambs. We've had a few really nice sunny days down here in winter. I was surprised. So, hasn't been too bad at all. It's not difficult to predict the flu season is going to look like, pretty much, yeah. And pretty much, the COVID is our current flu season. That's what it is. It's just slightly a bit worse than the traditional flu. But even, look, there have been flu strains that have been even worse killers than COVID in the past. So, people need to go back and look at the stats. They do exist. All governments keep them of, all-cause mortality from respiratory infections. So, but yes, now for some reason, because we got poor data out of China and a whole lot of academics in Britain in particular did epidemiological studies based on that poor data. And so what they assumed was that the death rate was extremely high for SARS-CoV-2. And so based on that, they made these blanket recommendations without investigating deeper and doing follow-up on the actual data, and basically told the world is coming to an end. Well, not exactly that, but that it's going to be a lot of people that are going to die. Something like a 1918 pandemic, which just didn't originate. And that's the reality. The damn thing, even the alpha strain was actually just slightly more infectious compared to SARS-1, because SARS-1 was piss weak. And SARS-2 is basically slightly a bit, and that's only the Delta strain, the recent one that's actually, slightly mutated in a way where it's actually staying within the water, like water droplets. So and that's the thing with, in summer, they usually dry from the sun. In winter, the droplets, as you sneeze out, they stay in the air for longer. And it just seems that they are basically staying around for a bit longer, and it's a bit more contagious. That's why it's still not as contagious, I don't believe, as the flu, but probably getting close to that sort of level. And that's why I think at this stage it's really hard to contain Delta. I think it's basically the game's over. And I think governments need to accept that. And the whole idea was to basically lock down for a short amount of period to basically not overwhelm the medical system. It wasn't basically to shut down permanently. This is madness. It's basically been destructive to so many businesses and so much of the economy, and created so much debt, and and destroyed so many people's lives. So we need to basically get back to normality. But unfortunately, that's not going to happen for some time. And we need to basically look at some of the research out there that's talking about respiratory infections and vitamin D and all that, and start promoting some of that stuff. I've talked about the long COVID stuff about vitamin C and ivermectin, things like that. There are other options, especially our carnivorous diet is really good in that regard. There's a few other things that other people can do. I'm going to put something together. I just haven't got around doing it, so I need to put something sort of like give a bit of a comprehensive outline, and a few of the things that I throw in there as well. I mean, I mentioned in the recent one on raw milk, and covered that a bit about the lactoferrin and the importance of lactoferrin when it comes to sort of respiratory type infections like COVID, like coronaviruses. So yes, drink your raw milk, you little kiddies, like Uncle Harry does. So yeah, that sort of stuff. So really important in that regard. I lived in Devonport for 3 years in 2004. Loved it. Yeah, it's a nice place up there. Actually, if you go towards the west, which is sort of Smithton, in some of those areas there, you could have literally, like, because of the Bass Strait effect, where the tide goes out quite a bit, then comes in, which is really has a lot of interesting possibilities when it comes to different fishing sort of things. So yeah. Is that all, you slacker? Yeah, I thought it was GTA. Oh, yes, those cockwombos. Say, glucose is stressful to the body. What a load of crap. What a load of crap is all I can say. It's absolutely not stressful at all to the body, gluconeogenesis. I mean, did they ask the body, is it stressed? I mean, it's just nonsense. These people just make up shit. It's absolute garbage, excrement. Body is designed to do these sort of things, to work in those things. It's only when the hormones are deranged, it becomes a problem. So yes, there's a lot of garbage out there. Yeah, I know. They say that, but the reality is it's usually people that are basically doing very low, therapeutic ketogenesis, and they tend to get this effect. If you get enough salt, because sodium actually suppresses cortisol, brings it down. So if you get enough salt and you get a number of the precursors in meat and all that, it actually brings that back to sort of normal levels. And even in a ketogenic state, like when you do a therapeutic, it's only the initial stage where it goes up, and then it sort of comes down and sort of normalizes over time as well, even people that are doing the therapeutic one. So, but I don't recommend the therapeutic one. It's for specific things like, epilepsy and things like that. It's not required for people to do. It's very catabolic, and it is stressful on the body, not because of gluconeogenesis. It's because of a whole lot of other, just generally stressful by depriving the body of key nutrients. You still need a whole lot of cofactors to basically regulate the body properly. So no, it's sort of garbage. I mean, I've covered a lot of this sort of stuff. There's a couple of videos that I've got on mine. Check them out, where I cover a number of these points, and we'll be covering more of these points in the future as well. I did try lactoferrin and breakfast Barbados tacos. I pulled beef cheeks and homemade tortillas. it didn't hurt me like usual, but I still felt like I'd eaten cardboard, lack of nutrition. Yeah, look, lactoferrin is a lectin binder, so it does, um, I've used it for cheat meals in that regard as well, like you. But it's not something that I recommend, people go out and actually engage the Randall cycle constantly, because it's not a very healthy thing to do. And saying, "Oh, I'm mitigating all my lectins with lactoferrin." I mean, yes, but it does work. Most people, that if they have a good enough dose, or they drink raw milk, they will notice there is a difference when eating some of these carbohydrates that are lectin rich in that regard. There is a threshold, if you go too high, obviously, there's only so much capacity for lactoferrin to help it for binding affinity in that regard. But if you go too high, it becomes a problem. But it just basically sort of explains how in the past people that actually consumed some carbohydrates and used to ferment them and reduce the anti-nutrients, and then combined a lot of raw milks in a number of European countries, how it actually, those synergies actually really worked. And when we broke that ancestral, or the, not exactly ancestral, but the traditional, the last couple of thousand years, that traditional sort of food preparation and food culture that we had, when we broke from that and went to the modern sort of very highly processed sort of approach, we discarded a lot of the protective mechanisms that existed in those approaches. One, people consumed, more animal foods because it was all seasonal. There was no refrigeration. So it was basically 75% animal foods and 25 to 30% plant foods all year round, because it was seasonal fruit for about a month and a half, more or less. Some areas there could be 2. In the tropics, you would get 2 seasons, but that's about it. So you got seasonal, plus I know that honey and fruit is the highest sources of deuterium, but at the same time, you got the sun, which helps with deuterium depletion, 19 parts per million per hour when you're out in the sun. So you're getting some depletion. Obviously, you get some internal depletion from your own body that is generating, and the depletion actually is sort of accelerated because also, the capacity for those UV light to actually energize the electron chain much better through complex, so there's the receptors within complex 4 that basically can be enhanced, the capacity for that to improve its functioning, so to speak. So you can actually get energy from the sun. Who would have known? Yes, photonic energy, it is called, red light spectrum in particular. So a bit of biophysics for yous. Yeah, but I know it's it's a good option to basically try and get, because you're going to have family members, especially children in particular, that are going to be eating this sort of stuff, and you don't want them harming the little kids. You don't want them harming their gut. So, preparing certain stuff in a certain way. I mean, I noticed basically also, Jess was feeding her kids, and they rather than using bread, they used, lettuce wrapping. Now, the lettuce is a really good, even though, it's low in oxalate, which is good, but also, nutrition-wise, it's shit. It's got nothing to offer. It's a waste of money. But it also, because of a leaf uses UV, and that depletes deuterium. So the water inside the leaf is low deuterium, like in fat. So it's actually deuterionated water, which is what the tribal people use. If you see them, they'll, like when Mary Ruddock was walking around with them, they would grab leaves and actually get the moisture, the water content out of that. That's low deuterium water. So it basically means you're actually not affecting deleterious your mitochondria. So that's the sort of stuff that you could potentially use with kids. And you could potentially throw in a bit of lactoferrin type foods like raw milk that could actually provide them that extra protection. But also against a lot of pathogens and stuff like that, because kids nowadays really live in a very toxic world compared to the past. And they need all the help they can get. I always get when I eat non-organic foods. Oh yes, yes, we've been there and done that. Yes, exactly. Ah, yes, yes, she's a very, very good-looking woman in her 40s. That is true. Very good-looking woman. But, she did sort of vegetarian, vegan type diets in the past and plant-based, and it really wrecked her health. And she came over to Carnivore. Um, she's a nutritional researcher. She went around the world and started seeing that what they were told about these tribal people is the complete opposite. They eat shitloads of animal foods, very little plant food, and they are healthy and robust. And that's what she realized. And that's why she continues doing research in these populations and also going directly to the populations I'm looking at and doing proper research and exposing some of these lies, which is really important. Because she's come from the other camp, the plant-based camp, come across, realized the lies, then went out and did the research and went, oh, it's not what we were told. Exactly. Nothing like a hammer. Yes. That was a very good hammer. It's a vegan hammer. Uh, MK7 or MK4. MK4, mate. It's the animal form. We don't want the plant form. About a third of the population can't even convert the shit. And it stays resident in the bloodstream. And some people are questioning whether there are some studies that show could it be have in some people a pro-oxidant effect. We don't know yet. We don't really have the research to say that. I can't say that. Nobody can say that. There is some, it seems, some anecdotes of reactivity that some, but they never really looked at those elements in the research. They sort of saw certain markers in certain people, but they didn't investigate. So we don't really know because we don't have the research. But if you take a look at the most studies that have been done, and this is the funny thing, you go to the Rotterdam study that was done in the Netherlands. They used MK4. You go to the Japanese study. That's Japan, where NATO, the MK7, and the Japanese are very good converters of MK7 genetically because they've been exposed to these foods for a very long time. Europeans are very poor in comparison. So it depends on the exposure to certain foods and adaptations. So MK7 is the one, and the MK7 is the only menaquinone within the K2 family that basically directly influences the DNA. That means can directly have an epigenetic influence on the DNA. No other menaquinone can do that. It's the animal form. And if you take a look at what I call the dinosaur family, and the dinosaur family, g'day Lukey, good to see you here. And the dinosaur family are birds, ostriches, emus, all the feathered creatures out there. They have extremely high levels of MK4. Actually, things like chicken has got far more MK4 than red meats. So, and I mean, they do sell some. There's a couple of Australian companies now that do sell emu oil, which is very high in MK4 as well. I've never bought it because I can't see the value. I eat eggs. I eat, brie, which is pure MK4. The bacteria in brie and camembert only produces MK4, which is great. And there's Gouda, which the Dutch consume, and you know, yeah, it's eggs, liver, but even red meats they do have MK4, but not as much as chicken. Chicken is the highest of the sort of the meat foods out there. So I always put a bit of chicken into my diet as well, once a week. I know a lot of people are concerned, but go and see my PUFA videos, and you'll understand that it's a load of fucking nonsense on that part as well. So, emu oil goes rancid quickly. I don't know enough about emu oil to be. I'm just talking about what it is as an oil. I don't know its composition or anything else about it. But if you've done research, I'll take your word for it. But I haven't looked into it. I just know about it that it does have MK4. But it's not, as I said, it's not something I recommend because I don't know enough about it. The problem with most oils, they do have some level of rancidity. It's probably something I should look into, but since I don't recommend it, I don't see the value. I don't recommend oils in general. I think that oils, once you turn something into an oil, you up the oxidation, primary and secondary products and aldehydes. And that's what we've seen with all oils, even olive oil, avocado oil. It's all the same stuff. You'll get, there's a difference when it's actually in a matrix of an actual real food. It's far more stable. Once you remove it from that, it's less stable. It's simple as that. We've talked about this before, MKers. So it's one thing that as people that know me on my channel, I've never recommended oils. I've been quite staunchly opposed to oils of any sort so I'll be quite emphatic on that. No, I don't have one on soy. Or we'll make something on soy at some stage. There's a lot. Look, a lot of people have actually already said a lot of things about how bad it is. It's not on the hormone system and many other aspects. But at some point, yes, I will cover that area as well. But yes, the MK4 from animal foods is the way to go. Is the one that we are species adapted to, and the one that our DNA responds to as well. So, so if we want our genes to work properly, our bodies to work properly and functioning in terms of, a number of, brain functions require MK4 directly. Your bone mineralization, your bone sort of density and bone remodeling also requires MK4. So there are basically enzymes that are transcripted due to vitamin retinol and vitamin D, and then these are activated by the K2. So in that regard, so you need basically, for osteocalcin and stuff like that. But there's a whole lot of other things. MK4 is also great for decalcifying soft tissue. None of the other menaquinones can do it. It's got like a double hook, and it can actually go into soft tissue and remove calcium. None of the other menaquinones can do that. That's the magic of animal menaquinones compared to plant menaquinones. The body's had all this sort of stuff, all these systems that's been designed to work with the animal food compounds that are coming from animal foods. So all species, depending on what their species appropriate diet is, adapt their whole system to that. Yes, they may have starvation foods, that fallback things, but at the end of the day, that's what they primarily adapt to. And that's the very important thing. And that's when you look at the genetics of certain compounds and how they influence, you start realizing, you start counting off these things and going, it's just all animal foods. So, say no more. Jin, good to see you, mate. Do you know how much bread is consumed in, I'm not sure about this place, Lotto Sindel Valley? No, I don't. Absolutely don't. Where is that area? Is that basically somewhere in Central Europe or somewhere?
Yes,
Sounds
it
sounds
appears
familiar.
Switzerland.
Switzerland. Okay, Switzerland. Okay. Yeah. Okay. That area. It's the stuff that Weston A. Price talked about.
Oh
Okay.
yes,
That's
so
why that's why it sounded familiar. I just couldn't remember exactly where it was in Europe. Yeah. But pretty much they didn't consume a lot. They only consumed they would basically make bread and they would ferment it over 3 days so they can get a lot of the lectins out of it. And then that bread was also sourdough. It was a similar variation to basically bread that we in Greece that is called Zea bread, because a lot of the breads are very similar because they came out of of Asia Minor. These breads, they got to basically to Greece, which was the first port of call, or this is the early agriculturalists that came through into the Greek world and then into Europe. And those varieties were the original varieties, which they had about a tenth of the gluten and very low in a lot of the other lectins. And so also the way they prepared them and processed them, they eliminated a lot of them, plus a lot of dairy. And as I've shown before in my videos and stuff like that, I'm not going to go looking for them. People can go and check my chats with Bart K, where I show about dairy. And Greece has similar dairy consumption to basically Switzerland. So milk consumption, that is. So they're getting shitloads of lactoferrin from that milk, raw milk in the past, not now, but in the past. And that mitigated a lot of the lectin because there were lactoferrin will bind to lectins and remove them out of the system. So it eliminates a lot of the problems. So you still are able to get some of the energy from the glucose from that. And we're talking about a period when people were very physically active, so they depleted glycogen, and they were undernourished in many regards. So it wasn't really causing a lot of problems. It's only now that we're more sedentary and we consume more of these things that we basically end up engaging the Randall cycle and putting a lot of, not being able to store because your liver glycogen is full, your muscle glycogens are full because you're sitting around all day, and you're just basically taking in energy you cannot basically utilize because everything's full. That's the problem. Where back then, these people were getting up in the morning. I mean, I've lived in Greece, and I know because my family is in both pastoral, but also my mother's side in lowlands in agriculture, in grain type or tobacco was back then anyway. And basically, they used to go out in the fields very early in the morning, and you wouldn't come back until basically about 10:30 to the village. And before you had your first meal, it'd be about 11 or 11:30. So that's when you broke your breakfast, when you had your breakfast, or you broke your fast. So you were physically active for multiple hours, depleting all the glycogen in the world and all that. And even then, it was primarily a lot of animal stuff. And, it was like a condiment, a bit of bread, as an add-on thing to wipe up all the actual salsa type thing. It was a very different way. And pretty much a very different tradition as well. And people then had a little snack in the midday with coffee and stuff like that. And in the evening, they had a family meal again. And that was about it. It was more or less 2 meals with a snack in between. This sort of 3 meals a day and being sedentary and all that is a very modern thing. And all refined stuff as well, which actually accelerates how quickly. Because when you actually consume also a lot of milk fat and all that with some of this sort of stuff, it actually slows down the uptake of this glucose as well. So that plays a role as well. So there's a lot of things that we've altered. We've refined things and it speeded up the actual, the sort of the gastric emptying process and getting this stuff into the body. But at the same time, we're sitting around most of the time. So that's large part of the problem. But also these foods are not species specific foods that were adapted to for millions of years, but it's stuff that we were forced because of the mega beast, the megafauna collapse as it's called, and we were forced into, supplementing additional plants into our diet. That's what happened. That's even some of the tribal societies, not all of them, some of the tribal societies still stick to ancestral, especially the Maasai. It's only milk and fat and meat. Some others incorporate some elements here or there, seasonally in most cases. But when you look around, it's only modern people that are extremely sick and chronic. They don't live a long life and then just die like most populations have for a very long time. It's just basically, and I'd ignore some of the early data in the last 200 years in most of the advanced countries. A lot of these people are living abysmal conditions in early industrialization. And you only have to go around and look at the shanty towns around India or other parts of the world to see the sort of absolute, the conditions that people are living in. They don't have a long lifespan. So you can't base that, yes, they may be eating a bit more meat than what they're eating today, but it was basically they're living in absolute squalor, exposed to all sorts of chemical compounds in the environment and pathogens. It's just a melting pot for disease and unhealthy. And it's not a lot of meat anyway. So let's put it that way. People by the 60s, 70s, when refrigeration came along, they were actually consuming far more animal foods because it was more prosperous times, the 50s, 60s, and 70s. But also at that time, we introduced seed oils, which really fucked up everything. That's the other part that we sort of ignore that came in. And so this is where all these confounding variables and all that. But still, even with the seed oils that were being consumed, people were still healthier, consuming 70% animal foods and 30% plants in the 50s and 60s. Today, we've seen an explosion of diseases when we've flipped that. In the past, was completely different. We need to take these into consideration. Cardiovascular disease. Before the Great Depression, it's only a very handful, very small. I mean, even the Cardiologists Association, because that's seed oils hadn't really got a lot of traction at that time. They were here or there, but very limited amounts. And so we didn't have a lot of disease. But then, due to the Great Depression, a lot of poverty, and also the military as well adopted these oils because they were easy to transport to fighting sites, because animal products are very hard to transport from one locality, or animals in general. It's easier to basically just send seed oils to the front line. So more of this sort of stuff was being used, and also smoking as well, which doesn't help to exacerbate some of these issues of endothelial dysfunction. Add all that together, you end up going from 3,000 people dying, from cardiovascular disease to 500,000 in 2 decades. That's an exposure to something. People were still eating, similar amounts of animal foods in the 30s, 20s, and the early part of the 20th century, right through to the 70s. Nothing had really changed. The only thing that had been included now was seed oils, and later in the 80s and 90s and onwards, even more refined sugar. That's when we had the zenith, the explosion of processed junk and refined carbohydrates to just add to the misery or add to the problems, our so-called solution, plant-based solution. And now they want to go 100%. Oh, wonderful. Let's really derange the human species. Yes. But yeah, look, they did, but very little. I wouldn't. Even my father he'd woke up in the morning, his mother used to make zea bread, and they would actually cut a slice, and I can tell you they had that over the week. And she would just cut him a slice and put a whole lot of, in those days, they didn't use olive oil. Nowadays they do, but the mothers, because it's the brainwashing. But back then they would put lard, and they would stick a big slice of feta cheese on, and it came from goat, because they had goats up there, not sheep. So it was goat feta cheese on that. That was Dad's sort of breakfast. That was he was given that, and then off to school or stuff like that. And so that's how it operated. And the rest through the days, it was sort of primarily a whole lot of dairy or animal foods with some vegetables. That's basically it. And we're talking about most of the year round, it's low glycemic vegetables like zucchinis and pumpkins and stuff like that. So we're not talking about any garbage here either. So it's a very complete different world. You're earthing yourself. You're living in a more natural environment, cleaner environment. There's a lot of different things at play, and you're physically very active all day long. So even the small amount of glucose you're taking in, you're depleting it. You're restoring glycogen stores and you're depleting it. So it's not going to be deleterious as long as you don't go over your energy requirements. You can't engage the Randall cycle. And these people did a lot of physical work. I mean, Dad used to go down and actually dig, dig all day long, or basically literally move rocks to basically, because of the river that flowed down. And so that is heavy manual work. We're not talking about sitting around on your ass all day. Very different. For 99% of our existence, we've basically been very physical. It's only in the late 20th century we haven't. And so even a small amount of sugar, even though it's not species appropriate and it's not advantageous to us, because we've seen the deleterious effects on the skeletal remains the archaeologists have, the iron deficiencies and all sorts of things. The reality is that, it's not as bad at small amounts. The body can cope. It's quite robust in that regard. It's not appropriate, but still can deal with it. Hey, Harry, what do you think? Dylan, good to see you. I think glycation via fructose sucrose is enough to drive collagen-based pathology in and of itself. That is a really hard one. Depends. There can be differences between genetics and people. Now, glycation, up until now, we've been told, based on older studies, that the glycation of fructose is about 7 times that of glucose. There's been recent research in the last decade or so that's saying that it's probably higher, up to 10 or more. But, and this is an important thing, the caveat here is that some of the research, isn't sort of as robust. There are a few confounding variables, and I've still got a few question marks on some of it. It could be much higher than 7, because obviously the methods that were used in the past were less accurate. But at the same time, the current methods have got a few issues with them as well. But let's just say 8 for average between the two. It's still quite a bit. It's the equivalent of, you would have to eat 800 grams of, glucose for every 100 grams of fructose, like honey or stuff like that. So that's the equivalent of what we're talking about, So when we're talking about, 800, just to basically give you an idea, times 4, 3,200. Nobody's going to consume that level. So we're talking about massive. Most people consume about maybe half that, like 1,600 calories. So we're talking about the equivalent of 50 grams of honey or fruit or whatever. So a complete different order of magnitude. I'm not saying that glucose isn't a problem. It is, but it's not as bad as honey and sugar and basically fruit in terms of glycation, which are very high fructose type. Obviously, things like agave and all that. God, that's just a glycation bomb. That sort of shit. It's a health food. Some people think. I mean, God Almighty,
Yeah,
get your
Harry,
head
but
examined.
there's something to be said. Like when you look at those populations that rely heavily on rice, and if they follow their diet, they usually have issues when they are very old. But for the most part, it isn't as bad as having
Exactly.
sugar all the time.
Remember, they're also physically active. So
Yes.
the amount of blood sugar doesn't rise substantially in those people. So it's only when they move to a city and become more sedentary and they start eating the same. In many cases, they become more prosperous, so they eat even more rice than what they used to, and that ends up causing the problems for them. They engage the Randall cycle because they combine even a lot of seed oils and stuff like that in with the rice, a lot of other things. So they push all the anabolic precursors while they're sitting on their asses in an office somewhere in Beijing or Shanghai. So there is a complete difference between that lifestyle and somebody, Rosalie Nasa about potatoes. Look, if you were to do the potato diet on its own, the potato diet, you would get an insulin to glucagon of 4. That's a ratio. So for every 1, millimole of glucagon, you would get 4 of insulin. So basically, and that's still fairly low. I mean, it's not as low as meat. So eating a steak is 1.3, fasting is 0.8, but it's still a hell of a lot lower than anything else. You can still lose weight on that level. So you can still lose weight eating a potato diet. It's not a healthy diet because it basically doesn't have, olive oil, adding fat to basically that will engage the Randall cycle. That's a completely different thing altogether in that regard. And also those fries from the olive oil, it will become rancid as well to some extent. Not as bad as some of the other seed oils, but still, it's not like, tallow and lard actually only produce trace elements, trace amounts, very little when you cook them. And I've already shown that in the anti-PUFA bullshit videos about animal PUFA. I've already done heaps of those and shown the research of the trace levels. So it's there to be seen by anyone. Heaps of research showing, when you just cook seed oils, you get massive amounts of primary, secondary oxidative products and aldehydes. Aldehydes, most studies actually focus on the aldehydes because the higher the aldehydes, the higher all the rancidity, the primary and secondary oxidative products. So it's a marker that just tells you that everything else has gone to shit as well in that regard. But look, glycating proteins is a problem. So certain foods, certain activities. So if you basically consume something and you're not depleting that, clearing it out of the system fast enough, and you're engaging the Randall cycle because you're being sedentary, it's going to be more deleterious. So 100 grams of glucose from a potato, if you're sitting on your ass, is going to be very different than if you're physically active. So there are differences in that regard. But if you are putting it in an equivalent system, so you actually had 2 humans or 3 humans exactly the same thing, and you compared the 3, one having a steak, one having a potato, one having something like honey and doing no physical activity whatsoever, absolutely sitting on their ass doing nothing, and then comparing the effects in the body, you will get one which will be 7 times more glycating than the other, and one that will be not at all, which is the meat. So there is going to be very little issue, and you will have basically perfect, controlled blood sugar, which will be demand driven to a very low level, and that's about it. So yes, I wouldn't worry about, as long as you're not eating that sort of stuff. But how much it drives it, it depends on a whole lot of factors. As I've said, physical activity levels, genetics, all these sort of things can vary how much this stuff gets cleared out of the system or not, and how long it's allowed to basically circulate around and cause more glycation, stickiness, as it's called. Remember, sugar has also a positive type charge, so it will actually adhere. Remember, your endothelial cells have like a negative charge. All the actual your lipoproteins, all the little anything that circulates within a lipid bilayer within your bloodstream, your red blood cells, all that, they all basically create a negative charge, especially if they've got enough sulfur amino acids in the diet. So, I wonder what foods have sulfur in them. Eggs, meat, methionine, a major sulfur amino acid. Remember the one that I talked about, about homocysteine and how, the bullshit that the vegans talk about being bad? No, it's good for, for those requirements. And that means it creates a negative charge around the pericellular matrix of those different bilayered proteins or whatever else are circulating with those structures like your red blood cells. And so the glycation can disrupt that and cause far more stickiness in that regard. So yes, not a good thing if you want things to circulate well and function well. Even a vegan diet, in a sense, because it's very low in fat, and especially the ones that are traditional vegan diets, and very what happens is the sugar doesn't stay in the system for too long. It's been uptaken because your the GLUT receptors are basically upregulated, take as much as possible. I mean, GLUT1, for instance, and GLUT3, they don't even need to basically, they're not even required to basically even use insulin. They'll just suck it in. It's only when there's excess due to the Randall cycle that you actually are pushing up insulin to force it through GLUT4. So, they'll just take it in. And what happens is, as a consequence, that you don't get much resident time in the bloodstream, less glycating. So even a vegan diet is less glycating than a SAD diet, or a low-fat diet is less glycating in that regard for that reason. But that doesn't mean it's healthy, because it's also nutrient devoid and deficient. Even Walter Kempner understood that. Long term, you can he only recommended for a year for certain specific conditions, because he didn't understand the low carb keto diet. But you can use the same method in the opposite direction. You're not engaging in the Randall cycle, and even less glycating, because there's no sugar involved. You're using fats. So it's even a better approach. And you're not actually taxing your pancreas and ending up with a lot of pancreas issues in the long run as well. Yes, another big issue. Or depleting a lot of minerals and other things, which a lot of these processes require glucose metabolism is much more heavy, has a much more heavy requirement in cofactors coming from vitamins and minerals. So overtaxes your system and depletes your system as well. So long term, you will fail on such a diet catastrophically due to micronutrient deficiencies. So yes, you may get a panacea, but it's look. A vegan diet is what I call a fasting mimicking diet, a traditional vegan diet. not the current ones, which are, donuts and junk food like Beyond Meats and stuff like that. That's just oils and sugar, and that's why they're getting all fat and sick, those vegans. But traditional vegans that ate, the sort of, raw plants and stuff like that, and very much was plant orientated with no oils and none of this sort of stuff. That was very much like the traditional low fat diet. And you can sustain that for a certain limited amount of time. Yes. Because it's like a fasting mimicking diet, but you can't fast forever. You'll end up nutrient deficient in the long run, and breaking down and falling apart like they do. Yes. Fasted carnivore, 95% from fat, 30%, depending on the hormonal, roughly in stuff we were talking about before. Not going to go over that again. Heard your YouTuber saying he won't cook in conventional lard because it's a lot of linoleic acid. He's an idiot. That's another carnivore, Luke, is it? Yeah. Tell him to watch my videos. And remind him that lard is actually lower. It's not, the amount of PUFA in is a different composition to that of tallow, but it's similar percentages. You're not getting any massive percentage. And if you're basically eating omega-3s as DHA and EPA from your diet and getting it from fish, eggs, liver, and those sort of things, and some from the red meat, you know what? That pathway is not going to be impeded, and it's just going to be converting linoleic acid to arachidonic acid. And what happens is when they look at carnivores and low-carb dieters that are doing this, their arachidonic levels go up. And arachidonic acid is not pro-inflammatory. It just goes up. And it's there to create prostaglandins and all that when a pathogen comes in, like a virus or whatever. That's normal functioning. It's only when it's chronic, because you're basically engaging the Randall cycle, making yourself sick because of chronic eating behaviors of, sad dieters. That's a different thing. That's chronic. We're talking about arachidonic acid only gets activated in a low carb person when you've got low C-reactive protein, low inflammation diet and all that. It doesn't. It just accumulates. It just increases and actually binds into cells because it can be utilized. It can actually, that's how the body will take the arachidonic acid and turn it, so it can actually create the prostaglandins and all these other things that it requires when it requires them. So, it's just nonsense, guys. Nonsense.
And it's funny because these guys that posted this video, they actually have a lot of good material, but I've noticed for a while now that they are going a bit on the Ray Pitt side of things,
Yeah, look, Ray Pitt's got a lot to answer with a lot of bullshit that he's actually peddling out there with no science. I actually challenge these people, and you have to challenge them and say, show me the research. And they've got nothing to show. And you know what they do? They show you all these sad dieters, or they show you all these other people that are irrelevant, or rat studies, which are deliberately, they've actually added a whole lot of basically sugar and seed oils together with a lard and saying, look, it's that. No, it's not. Because when you go back to earlier studies, which I've shown stuff where they've just shown lard or bacon or stuff like that, real food, you don't get that effect because there's not an issue there. Never has been. People, the majority of people in the world, as I said, in the US, Cincinnati was called pork polis. Pork polis. And it was called that because it was a city of pork. It supplied the entire eastern seaboard and central part of the United States with lard. And the cooking oil up until the early part of the 20th century for the majority of Americans was lard. The Okinawans, it's lard. The Sardinians, it's lard. The Greeks in Ikaria, it's lard. My family, my father larded with his mother, helped his mother. He was the oldest son, in the mountains. And his grandfather, my great grandfather, lived to 107. He hated vegetables, and he basically was dairy and meat, very much like the Messiah. So, I mean, just fucking nonsense, absolute nonsense, But that's a sort of cockwomble shit that we've got. Highly confounded with a whole lot of other things, but they ignore the other variables because it doesn't suit their narrative. Exactly. So, but I've got research that I've shown and demonstrated that it's not an issue. Go and check all my PUFA stuff on mine, and it actually blows all that out of the water. You can't, in reality, you can't have two things. When I can demonstrate you with good research and mechanistics that demonstrate that this isn't a problem, and then somebody shows you something that combines other confounders, sugar, seed oils, and other things like that, you have to question and say, is this a legitimate study that proving anything? No, it's highly confounded. They've added in a whole lot of other things that are going to create the problem. So is it that or the other things? I've got to hear a study that's showing on its own, not a problem, lard, bacon, whatever, and here it's a problem. What else is included? Here it's on its own. Here other things are included. Maybe it's the other things that are causing the problem. Be questioning of this sort of stuff and point this out to these crackpots, because they like to use studies that are designed to peddle this garbage. I mean, people were consuming lard for decades in the US. We had none of these diseases. There were none of these diseases around. The majority of Europe, every single village, they had pigs behind in the backyard. It was well known. I mean, you go through Germany. I mean, Germany was like pork central. And in the early days, I mean, these diseases didn't exist. They just didn't exist. And that's the whole thing. People need to explain how you could have a higher consumption in Germany in the past of pork and you don't have disease. And now you've got a lower consumption and you've got disease, and the pork is the problem. I mean, for fuck's sake, how fucking brain dead do you have to be to think like that? It's less now than then, and there's more problems now, but the pork's the problem. What sort of dissonant, cognitive dissonance, or I just call it stupidity and ignorance, do you have to be ridiculous?
I should actually, you made me remember about this, but I should see if I can get some data on this here in Brazil, because I know for a fact that in my grandfather's time, like people were eating like rice. When they made rice, it was cooked with like lard in it, and like people were really physically active then, and there's a lot of rural labor.
There's all
and
those
things
other
like
elements as well.
Yeah.
But also there's elements in the fat as well that are basically improving mitochondrial function, because remember, it's low deuterium.
Yes,
the low deuterium means they're out in the sun because they're working, also deuterium depleting. And so even the small rice that they're having, because they're having less, they can't afford a lot, that is the deuterium from that is still, look, rice is a much lower deuterium thing than basically refined sugars, okay? It's about in the sort of 140 something, 48 or whatever, so it's not a severe where you go to like refined sugars and other things, they can go up to about 160. Obviously refined seed oils are the worst, 255 parts per million, which is nearly double the safe zone, which is 130 parts per million. And that's the problem. It's 40% of the diet now is seed oils. They're everywhere. They are toxic to the mitochondria. I can't stress this enough. There's just too much deuterium. The whole purpose of the citric cycle is water production and to dehydrogenate. All those stages of dehydrogenation are water producing enzymatic processes, and they have to remove the deuterium out of the system and add in other hydrogens. Remove deuterium ones with that have basically got a neutron That's what a deuterium, for those people who don't know, basically, it's a stable isotope of hydrogen. Your classical one is proton with an electron around it. These ones are basically proton in the middle with a neutron stuck to it. That neutron is the problem. That doubles the weight of that molecule, and that is the problem, that the body needs to remove those neutrons out of the system. And if it doesn't, they get through to the inner mitochondrial membrane, and they damage the machinery, which is called ADP synthase. There's a little nano machine of a proton, and what it does is it circulates, rotates at about 9,000 RPM, and that basically will, when there's a protein gradient, it will suck those proteins through, and then what happens is an ADP, adenophosphate, will literally stick a little phosphate on and will create ATP, and that's your energy production as that rotational thing. But if a large, because it's actually got a specific size for protons to go through, if you get a large neutron going through there, it busts the motor. It just busts because it's rotating at very high speeds. Anything large will bust the motor. It won't flow through, but bust the motor, the gears, and then you're fucked. And if you do enough of that damaging, you end up with deprived energy over time, with mitochondria that are fucked all over your body, can't heal your body because you can't produce enough energy to heal. And as a consequence, you basically, more and more of your cells become senescent and damaged, and you start aging more rapidly and becoming more dysfunctional, not able to detox properly, not able to do a lot of things. Mitochondrial dysfunction are the root, but the thing that's actually causing and driving mitochondrial dysfunction is all these foods that are laden with deuterium, including water. Yes, I know. The favorite thing that people like, water. Water, this stuff, is 155 parts per million. It's actually higher than rice. Okay? That's actually worse. Okay? I just use it because my throat sometimes gets a bit, and I need it. But, those leaves, like, it's best to get water out of leaves like the tribal people do. I mean, the Samburu, the people of the Kalahari, they literally, in ostrich eggs, they will get water out of the leaves and put it in, and that's what they drink. Low deuterium water, fantastic stuff. Then you move into a shanty town with tap water from the city, high deuterium, and kibble. Become very sick very fast, I can tell you. So, there's a lot of things there. If I was basically a leader of a country, the first thing that I would do is basically change the water. I would set up a factory to produce low deuterium water for the whole population. That would be one of the biggest public benefits that I could do for the population. Massive.
And it's incredible because I still see this a lot, like a lot of fitness influencers and people like just showing off that, oh, look, it's only midday and I've already drunk 2 liters of water or some shit like that. And you're just like pissing out minerals and getting extra deuterium. Like,
basically. And dehydrating even faster.
Yes.
Water dehydrates you. The thing that hydrates you is fat.
Yes.
The camels know it. The smartest animal on the planet is not human, it's a camel. And they live longer, and they don't even show their age because they are deuterium depleting machines. They live off, and also the cactus, very low deuterium. They live off the stuff. They are marvelous animals. I mean, I'm an Orthodox Christian, but if basically I believed in, the sort of reincarnation, I'd love to come back as a camel. Not with one hump, with 2 humps. More impressive.
Oh god. This is mean material.
I couldn't help myself. I had to throw
this
that
is
in.
mean material, Harry.
I know you boys are going to have a field day in the Discord about this one. Such freaking about Harry say that fructose is glycating. Oh yes. The worst thing you could do to basically a repeat person is tie them up and literally just lather them with lard. It would be like hell for them, but it would be funny.
Oh God. Advanced torture techniques here.
Oh, exactly. You gotta come up with creative things, Lukey.
Indeed.
More about teeth. Oh, our favorite bombshell. G'day, Shell. Good to see you. And cool glasses as well. Sexy glasses, my dear. I believe in chelating factors. Yes. Yes. So do the vegans. They love chelating factors. It's called plants. Rosaline, good to have you here. Let me. Congratulations on gold last night, Luke. You guys won something in the Olympics, I suspect.
Yeah, I believe it
I
was
wasn't watching.
soccer. I'm not following everything.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that's right. The soccer. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. I was going to watch it, but I didn't get around. I was doing a video last night.
Look at what your life has become, Harry.
Yes, I know. It's YouTube. Yes, we I think we covered that one. Oh, do you have a video on soy? Yes, I do plan to make one. Up syndrome. Yes. We need to make one on soy syndrome. Yes, it's a pernicious disease amongst the veganerized population. Yes, they suffer heavily from it. Do you suggest? Nice one, Levy. Yes, I did say once to somebody, you know where you can put that between your cheek bums and all that, and their reply was, mine are strong, and I can basically squeeze something out of it. I'm going, oh God! And she was a woman as well. What can one say? But I probably deserved it for the initial comment.
Oh my.
Yes, I can sometimes, even Mira sometimes over tease her. But she teases me back, She gets her money's worth. Yeah, she was. But yes. It's a pretty good teaser herself as well, let's put it that way. Yeah, we usually we laugh with each other, which is a good thing. I mean, I think that's an important thing in relationships. You gotta I think sometimes people just take themselves far too serious. Yeah, anyway. What's Lamb saying? I don't know when you study regarding the influence of diet on COVID tests. Turns out after correction on age, sex, and race, oily fish as well, lambs, is the biggest mitigator. Yes, it's crazy stuff. Yes, vitamin D in cod liver oil and retinol. Wonderful things that do basically play a very important role, these fat-soluble vitamins. I mean, if you take a look at all these things in animal foods that have such a positive effect on the immune system, on the innate and adaptive immune system, the total immune system, on, the mucosal, boundaries. I mean, Vitamin D, very important for the tight junctions. And even vitamin A is playing a role there. All these enzymes that are playing important roles in sort of barriers to protect the body from, things coming in or pathogens or whatever. Salt, chloride in the salt, animal foods that encourage more proton pumps to basically produce more acid, so we can get the acid down to about 1 or 1.5 to kill off those pathogens, as a protective system. Animal foods and the sun, all these sort of things, a combination is just, it's a magical relationship we've got with this planet. And we've broken that covenant with our natural world. And that's why we suffer, So they had to correct a lot. Oh, yes. Like home ownership to crush the data. Oh, yeah. Look, that's normal in studies, They've already decided, lambs, what they want from the study, and they adjust the data. That's what it's called, adjustment. What I call basically fabrication, junk research, because that's all it is. You have to look at the raw data. It's the same thing happens in, you take a look at the data coming from satellites in terms of, weather, temperature, and then you look at the terrestrial stuff, and they do all these adjustments. Well, that's not science. It's like a physicist, for instance, measuring an electron or a proton or a photon, and then adjusting that and saying, no, I'm not going to accept the observation that I measured. I'm going to basically come up with something different. And that's exactly what these people do. You've got to look at the raw data. And even if the raw data doesn't give you enough, you've got to say, well, the raw data did not, it's not convincing enough. It doesn't provide enough, but there may be a relationship here, and that's about it. But they don't do that. They deliberately adjust the data and make these, false associations and relationships, or magnify, to be more precise, certain things and diminish certain others in their correlations and associations. And it's deliberate because they're pushing agendas. It's simple as that. That's why I usually say to people, I go, ignore all this junk science. It's irrelevant. And I go, let's look at high quality studies. Do we have any? Yeah, we've got a couple. We've got the direct study out of Israel back in the 2005, and we've got basically the direct study. The A to Z study from Christopher Gartner, who's a plant-based academic. Wonderful. Here we've got somebody who is hostile to the Atkins diet, includes the Atkins diet as one of the elements in his study. It's done for a year. These people are not told to do anything other than exactly what the book says. The traditional Atkins diet, not the new Atkins diet, the one out of Duke University. We're talking about the old traditional. It's bacon and eggs and a lot, because it was heavy meat diet, and it basically comes out first. And on the Stanford video where he talks about it, it's a dated video, but he talks about it. And he basically says, lowers this inflammation. And because it was a diet based, but they then they did take a lot of blood samples, and they basically went back and looked at a lot of this sort of stuff. The additional data, they would notice lower inflammation, better lipid outcomes, and all this sort of things. They couldn't deny that. He was being asked by the audience, other people in the audience at Stanford University, and he was having to say. And at the end, he said something stupid. He said, oh, look, I'm going to sort of disown part of his family. He said, if they don't go vegetarian, or near, that I'm, for the ethical reasons and all that, all this nonsense. But he couldn't basically disprove the data. The data was clear there. But he got a lot of stick for that from Ornish, because Ornish was part of also the study. There was the Ornish, the sort of nutritional one, which is like the Learn one, and the Zone diet, which was a popular one in the past. And those four, and the Atkins, those four. So you had one, which a mixed macro sort of paleo-esque type diet. You had the high animal food, low carb type one. You had the low fat, and you had the vegetarian one of the Ornish, which was sort of heavy plant. It wasn't as vegetarian. It was sort of a semi-vegetarian in some aspects. It varied amongst the people. Some were more vegetarian than others, so you had a bit of movement there, but that's beside the point. It still basically performed just as good as the others, not much difference. So between a mixed macro diet and these low, they actually performed very similar in terms of weight loss and a number of other biomarkers. The outstanding one there was only the Atkins diet, but pretty much he disowned it and he's walked away from it. Why? Because it doesn't suit his narrative. And that was a randomized trial, okay, where they separated the people in different. So there were multiple different diets groups. You don't need a control here because basically you have a control here, and the control is basically people doing the mixed one, if you want it, but you don't have a control. You don't require this sort of stuff because you're comparing different diets. You're not basically like having to have a control like for a medication where you need a placebo group. People know what they're eating. I mean, you can't have a placebo group in such a study. So just in case anybody throws that ridiculous thing at you, you can't, because there is no placebo group in randomized controlled trials that are basically on nutrition. You're either on one diet or you're on another diet. That's simple as that. Okay, let's clarify that point just in case somebody throws that garbage at you because they're just brain dead and they'll throw something idiotic like that. You're on a specific diet. Now, they took them in to the theatre. They actually gave them the book, the free book, the original book, the Ornish diet book, the Atkins diet book, the Zone diet book, the sort of nutritional association book. They gave them the actual book, and they had the same nutritionist to convince these people that they were on the best diet. Don't talk to the others. You're on the best diet. So they convinced these people that they're on the best diet. Got it? And then they went away for a year doing the diet, eating animal foods and all that. Now, obviously, towards the end, the Atkins diet came back closer to the others. Not complete, it was still better performing, but the people's carbs went up. It wasn't a low carb diet anymore after 6 months. It was something like there was about 30% carbohydrate in there. So it was more like, you could say, the old mixed diets that people had in the 50s and 60s, 70% animal foods, 30% plants type thing. So it still did better than the other diets, but it wasn't as superior as the first 6 months. And you can see it, the difference. So saying, I'm doing it for 6 months and then starting to cheat in the other 6 months, it's not going to cut it. That's the reality. Now, with the other diets, there was less, seemed to be a bit more compliant, but, varied. It varied a bit. But the reality was that sort of the sort of low fat and the Ornish type, they sort of also started complying less. Probably the ones that complied the most were the ones on the mixed macros. And I understand why, because most people have grown up eating a mixed macro diet for the majority of their life. That's the normal in their head, the norm. And so we can understand why that happens. But the reality is that even when they were complying in the early parts, the diets, which were basically the Ornish diet or whatever, was just slightly below the Zone diet. It wasn't any doing in any stellar way. I mean, the Atkins diet was just way down here. It was just killing all the other diets, and that was showing the superiority. And that's only over 1 year. That's all we've got. Just over 1 year, no more than that. I heard a Luke. You got a fan?
Yeah. She's got to pretend to be nice sometimes.
Ah, yes, good COVID propaganda. Ah, yes. AG, hey Harry, do you know when Novavax is coming or how to get it? I don't know how to get it. You'd have to check with your own health authorities wherever you are to find that out. But I don't know when it's going to be available in different countries. In Australia, they're talking about later this year. They're not very clear, and I have called the local department here, but I didn't get much of a we don't know yet. We haven't been told from Canberra was pretty much so the central government hasn't told the state authorities when they're getting it. So they know it's coming because it's been ordered out of Europe. So because we're like one thing that most people don't know, because I've had even my friends saying, "Where's it coming from?" Because we heard it's being manufactured in India. Is that a good place to manufacture? So I'm getting all these sort of things, people telling me about, different places. Indian manufacturing is much better than what it used to be years ago. So I wouldn't be too worried about that. But where is it coming from? Okay, all vaccines into Australia are coming from European facilities. Period. Pfizer, Moderna, the AstraZeneca, Novavax, they're all coming from European facilities. They're not coming not from North America, not from Asia, not from anywhere. They're coming from Europe into Australia. And I would say the same thing is happening for New Zealand, because New Zealand usually buys together with Australia, or they have contractual arrangements to get to source from the same companies in whatever country. It's just one thing they do. Economies of scale. It saves New Zealand money, and we do it because we've got a very close relationship between the two countries. They're actually even in our constitution. Many people don't know. New Zealand was one of the original states that had the option, and still has the option under the Australian Constitution, or the original agreement, let's put it that way, the original agreement of the states to join a federation. Basically, New Zealand just opted out at the time. But they could always come and join us if they wanted to and create a larger Australasia. Anyway. But then again, we don't want them. We wouldn't be, just think of it. We'd lose all the opportunity for those Kiwi jokes, the sheep jokes and stuff like that. I mean, what fun is having them part of Australia? Because then, they're Australians. You can't really joke, or take the piss out of them.
Oh, God.
We don't want you, Richard. Stop trying to steal New Zealand, Harry. We don't fucking want you. God, I'm a bunch of inbred, sheep over there. We don't want you part of this country. Get it right. I'm just talking about history here. History lesson. You wait for the Eurostream, bitch. I'll have to go. You know what? I've got a solution for that. We never know. Bart may turn up on that one with Ted. I'll wind up Ted. He'll go feral. Thanks, Libby. I never hold back. Typical New Zealander. Bollocks. Okay. Hey, Harry, could you give a quick summary as to why the mRNA vector vaccines are more risky than the protein-based Novavax? Thank you. Simply, these ones were used in oncology before they have been used in this sort of area. And they've got a whole lot of raft of issues. The viral vector ones, those ones tend to basically cause a lot of clotting factors. It depends on the genes. There are specific genes like the F5. The other one's what was the other one? I think it's the F8, I think, as well. But I think the one that's the most vulnerable is the F5 gene. But anyway, there is still some element. It's just not clear at this moment. I wish there was a bit more research on that specific gene in the people that have had the clotting factors. It just hasn't been clear enough. Well, they haven't looked into it, which is a bit of annoying, to say the least. But anyway, let's move on from the genetics. So there is a proportion of the population which are susceptible, and most people don't know. I mean, I know that I don't have a susceptibility to 5, so I'm safe in that regard. But there is a large proportion of the population that don't know because I've never done genetic tests. And so it is like playing Russian roulette. Zzz. Let's see if it works. So it potentially, if you've got these clotting factors and you're unaware of it, you could potentially die, So that is a risk. Are you prepared to take it? Are you prepared to play Russian roulette? In some populations, some of these clotting factors can be as high as 10%. So are you prepared to take that risk? I'm not. Some people are. I'll leave it up to them. Then there's also some level of autoimmunity that can cause the Johnson & Johnson variety, which is also another viral vector one, similar to AstraZeneca, but it also seems to cause some neurological issues in some people that are susceptible, again, a certain proportion of the population. So now, will some of the others in future also, or are causing low-grade stuff? We don't know because we haven't had any research. It's a bit up in the air. We know from other viral vector methods in the past, we've had some of these issues in neurological type issues in people with doing oncology and using this method. So that's another bit of an issue. The mRNA ones are well known to cause autoimmune issues. So that's well established in the oncology field. So there's plenty of research on that. It can vary between people as well. It does also affect clotting factors in some people as well. So there's a lot of different things. The other thing that actually happens is it's not a localized event. You're actually putting it in a lipid nanoparticle so you can circumvent the immune system, the innate immune system, the defensive system. So it gets past the defensive system. You don't feel the pain at the site where you've actually been injected, which you do with traditional vaccines. It basically will go through the system, circulate, go into cells, because it can, in a lipid nanoparticle, it can get into the cell. And basically, because fat can get into the cell, let's put it all in lipids like lipoproteins and all that. It uses similar methods of getting into the cells. And then when it gets in there, it unloads its cargo, which is the mRNA or DNA, like in the viral vector ones, like AstraZeneca, machinery, which hijacks, like the virus does, hijacks. But the difference between the virus will actually replicate its whole self, its entire self. What this does is just replicate, use the machinery of the cell to replicate just spikes. That's it, just spikes. Now, these spikes basically do have a vulnerability, a bond in the middle where they can actually be cleaved off, so they can be broken up when they get into the bloodstream. And as a consequence, they can circulate with a big spike load around the place, sticking into all sorts of cell walls and all sorts of areas. What that can do now, the spikes themselves don't cause the problem. It's the immune system that reacts to that. So you get this systemic reaction of the immune system throughout the whole body in different tissue, which then inflames a lot of that tissue and creates. And if you've got a lot of this reactivity, you can actually also induce a certain level of autoimmunity in different tissue as well. That is the problem. Okay, that's what they saw in the oncology research. It does depend on a number of factors. It depends on your vitamin D status. So if your vitamin D status, which the majority of people are very piss poor nowadays, are more vulnerable. And that's why we're seeing both from people getting the virus, because even getting the virus will cause a lot of these problems, these autoimmune, clotting, and all sorts of things. We've seen it with the virus. And it has a lot to do because of the poor nutrition and the poor status of people, plus the poor vitamin D status of people. Because vitamin D regulates the immune system, prevents cytokine storms, and clears this stuff out in a very orderly way without overreacting. And that's what you want. You want to be a bit more sickly for a bit longer when you've got good vitamin D cells, and then clear the stuff out, especially when you get these very highly. But at the end of the day is when you combine vitamin D, closes those junctions, those tight junctions, which reduces the viral load that comes in the first place. And then you've got all the animal foods like raw milk, lactoferrin, and all the other important substance in the food supply, plus an upregulation of glutathione and all that. You've got all these mechanisms and all these systems working in a species appropriate animal, human animal. You will get good clear out of this sort of stuff, and you may not even notice it. And you'll get basically then adaptive immunity. And I think this is what's happened amongst the populations like the Maasai and all that, because they've been interacting with some of their relatives in the cities. Their relatives in the cities who are eating kibble are getting very sick, but the people in the tribal areas aren't. Voila, meat and milk have got nutrients in there and the sun that are combining all together to basically provide immunity. This is what Mary noticed, that when you look at these populations, these groups, they were different compared to the city slickers. She noticed a difference, so that was a side issue. Sorry for going on a bit of a tangent there with the Maasai, but it's a very important thing to point out. So these things are basically a problem where the protein-based Novavax is more traditional. So the only sort of the difference between a traditional one and a traditional one, entirely traditional one virus, what they would have done is they would have got the entire material protein, and they would have basically deactivated that and then cultured it in something like an egg or something like that, and then they would basically use that to provide you as an injectable thing. Now, they didn't want to use the egg form, but they don't believe, because this company realized, there's some issues with these mRNA ones and vector, they're coming from oncology. They didn't want to go down that approach. So they decided to go a different approach. They decided, we're just going to use the actual spike and nothing else. And so what they did was they infected moths using similar things like the viral vector mRNA type things with a mRNA sort of material to basically go in there and exploit, like these ones are doing to humans, but doing it to moths, and basically creating shitloads of spikes and then harvesting those spikes. So clearing all the other material and harvesting and basically just getting the spikes and nothing else, and then modifying the spikes. Now, how do they modify the spikes? One thing, that bond in the middle, they've actually altered that deliberately. They mutated that deliberately for one reason, so it couldn't be cleaved off. They don't want it to be cleaved off and ending up in the bloodstream or all over the place. No. Very smart people. The other thing they did on the other side, on the receptor side, the pointy side, they put 2 prolines there. Those prolines, amino acids, are basically preventing the thing from getting inside the cell. So it can't, because of the prolines, can't stick to the cell wall, which is a good thing. But even if it got into the bloodstream, cannot basically, it'll join to the receptor but can't go in the cell because of the prolines. So it prevents it from going inside the cell or sticking to a cell wall, which is great. So, and what they've done is they've actually rafted it on a lipo nanoparticle. So this nanoparticle is a lipid, is a fat-based one, which is even smaller than the others. So it's even less of an issue. It's like it's a similar size, a very small size, similar like the liposomal sort of supplements, because they do the they're using similar technology, but they're using it as because it's a more stable, because it's used in the supplement industry, it's a more stable thing. They're using it as sort of a rafting thing, this fat little globule. So it's a rafting thing. So it's not the outside masking itself from the immune system, but it's basically rafted on there. It's more for stability. So the spikes stay in one place. They don't float around. They stay in one space on one thing. So then you've got an adjunct, which is a bark extract. So they've got in there. And so they shoot that into your muscle. And basically what it has, it creates a localized, you've got this thing that is similar size to the virus with all these spikes around it, because the size is very similar, and it basically creates a massive, strong immune system. You will feel the pain like a traditional vax, and the immune system, or the innate immune system, will rush into that to engulf that and basically eliminate it, and also created over time adaptive immunity. That's the whole purpose. It doesn't have mRNA technology. Can't go anywhere. Just stays there. At most, some of it, if they prick you, that means if they, some doctors or nurses are very poor at vaccinating people, and they may prick you, and a bit of it may release into the bloodstream. As I said, if some of that, it still can't bind to the receptor. It can bind to the receptor, but can't get into the cell, and can't bind to a cell. And it will only be a couple of particles here or there. It's whatever you inject, that's it. You don't get a big load. You're trying to get, that's why they create all these spikes, to create a very strong, with the adjunct, this bark extract, they're trying to create a strong immune response in that locality, in a localized area, like a traditional vaccine. The difference is, in a traditional vaccine, they're using the entire protein of the actual virus, the entire virus, so in a larger amount, to create a more intense localized effect. Here they're using less, but with this reactive bark extract, and with a lot of spikes, to basically make the immune system, when it sees this sort of thing, go, ooh, I need to really go after it, because it's got all these spikes and all that. It's like it's a big, it's like a smaller quantity, but having a bigger effect on the immune system, like going, ooh, this is a really big problem, but it's not. It's just basically all these rafted spikes, but it's actually creating like a rich reactive environment, and it will rush in and grab it. And it's a localized effect. So even if a bit comes, you'll just get a bit of reactivity here. The other ones, they're still replicating away shitloads of more spikes and just flooding your system with spikes. And if you've got a weak immune system, your body's getting overwhelmed with all this reactivity all over the place. And you're getting these low-grade, like cytokine effects. Not a cytokine storm, a full-blown cytokine storm that you'd get from the real virus, but you're still getting a sort of a low-grade reaction. And that's sort of creating all sorts of issues and damage to tissue all over the place. And so what we're seeing is even people who are taking the mRNA and the viral vector getting long COVID symptoms, like the people who survive COVID and get a lot of tissue damage and some issues, autoimmune type issues and clotting factor issues and stuff like that. They are getting similar from these ones. That is why I'm opposed to them. Now, in general, and I have to make this quite clear, all vaccines have not gone through a 5 to 7 year trial period. Traditionally, that's what they did before they were allowed to be used en masse on a public. Even in the past, we had diseases like TB and all sorts of measles and all sorts. But you know what? People kept dying, and only small amounts of people being tested, and small amounts to determine whether their safety over 5 to 7 years. We never did that this time. We said emergency, and we're going to rush and put these into use. And they weren't even traditional. So on paper, as I said, Novavax looks pretty good on paper. But there may be small amounts in the population of people that may react a bit poorly to that or anything. You know, these people, you know, there may be, you know, there may be none, but there may be one in a billion, you know, that may react. We don't know. They may have certain types of, you know, like there are certain people that have got certain lipid metabolism, you know, and it's only a handful of people in the world. And it could be just one of those handful of people that react poorly. They get the Novavax and react poorly. There's always risks with everything. Crossing the road, there's risks with everything. But on paper, it looks pretty good. It looks more like a traditional vaccine. It'll have a localized effect and technically shouldn't be a really big problem. I tend to say to people, if you can basically, if you're able to use the sun or vitamin D, stick to that. It works. You know, my dear Mira, vitamin D, and sorted her out. But if you're being threatened with losing your job and it's really hard and, you know, and eventually becomes mandatory with passports and all sorts of things and, you know, crazy things that are happening, you know, when you're looking at options, your best option is Novavax, you know, currently. In most advanced countries, that's going to be your best option. But, you know, at the end of the day, it still hasn't been tested over 5 to 7 years like traditional vaccines prior to that. So, you know, I'm sort of confident that if I was forced at gunpoint, then I would basically pick the Novavax. Simple as that. But at the same time, I would still basically make sure that I had a good vitamin D status for the immune system to be working very well. Thank you very much. And, you know, and basically for any possible reactivity, I don't know what people's clotting factors are like or stuff like that, just in case the nurse, you know, when they jab you, it doesn't go into the muscle, it goes into the bloodstream. You know, maybe some sort of anti-clotting thing for a couple of days, you know, 2 to 3 days. You know, you probably only need it for a day, but anyway, just as a precautionary principle, an aspirin or, you know, it's not going to really harm you for a very short amount of time. So as an option, but at the end of the day, we shouldn't be forced to take anything that hasn't been tested over 5 to 7 years. But if the circumstances force us to travel or whatever, I don't know I'm not going to tell people what to do. It's your life, AG. You need to make those choices. I'm just giving you the information. I'm sticking to vitamin D personally. If I've got no other option because work's putting pressure on me or I can't travel, you know, to get to Mira and all that, then I may have to, I've got no option, then I'll have to go for the Novavax option. But I'm not sitting there saying to people, pushing this or that or whatever. I'm just giving you the information of what I think based on paper, on what I've read and researched. Now, the other thing is I am researching some of the other newer vaccines that are coming out now, including the new Indian one. There's a couple of ones in India. There's, and I think they call it Coravax or something like that, the Indian variety of Novavax. But there's a couple of others also that they have. There's one in southern India and one in northern India. But I'm reviewing them at the moment. The biggest problem is some of them, it's in Hindi, the actual research. I'm having to bloody translate things. So, fuck yeah. Oh, that's a good one. That's a good. Oh, thanks for the extra hump. That's a good one. Oh, bloody hell, Lucky. Oh, what a cute camel. Oh, thanks, mate. That's a good one.
I'm glad you're finding it funny.
Oh, I found it hilarious. I can laugh with myself, I can tell you. I'm probably one of those people. You brought tears to my bloody eyes.
Very nice.
That's good. That was great. That was funny.
You're welcome, Harry. But yeah, after that,
We
I
need
think
to
we
do.
should get going.
We need to do one of Bart with as a sheep
Oh yes.
for tonight.
Oh God.
Uh,
Since I have
and
homework now.
and Ted in a larger size with one of those, as his shepherd.
Oh God. Oh God.
Have I given you ideas?
I'm actually noting this down, so don't forget.
And then I'll invite him on. Yes, very much so. Come on, Harry. How can you have a problem with olive oil? The Hellenic race wouldn't exist if it didn't have it. Now, let me take you down memory lane and give you a bit of a long story on olive oil and its history. Okay, let's go back in time. It doesn't sound like the time machine anyway. At Twilight Zone, but anyway, it didn't really work well. I should stick to my day job, which is cartography. Anyway, back to what I was saying. In ancient Greece, they did not use olive oil for food. Now, there was some that used it. This was in the Hellenistic era, but in the pre-Hellenistic era, it was actually used as lighting lamps. So it was. Now, what was there was a. This was in the Levant. I'm trying to think in Levant. It started with an M. Anyway, it's the period before the Assyrians. There was a group in the Levant that basically used olive oil for the first time to light up small towns, the lanterns of small towns. And that's where that sort of trend took off, but I just cannot remember. It starts with an M. If anybody remembers what they called, if they know or whatever, let me know. Not Mesopotamia, nothing. It was a different group. It was way before them. It was much earlier in time. We're talking about the time when the Assyrians, we're talking way back before these other civilizations even existed. Sorry, the Sumerians. We're talking right way back, even before the Assyrians or any of these groups existed. So we're talking about going even further back in history. And yes, exactly. They still use olive oil in icon lamps in the Greek Orthodox faith. That is exactly right. They do. Even in homes, my mother used to basically have a little next to the actual icons. So yes, very much so. And people back then, it was basically lard. Olive oil was expensive and was traded as light for energy. It was an energy commodity. And the first oil wars between the Persians and the Greeks was the first oil war. So all those invasions of Greece was over the olive oil trade. Now, you will be told that all those nasty, nasty Persians came in because they just hated the Greeks. No, or they were annoyed by the Greeks, or things like this. Or the Greeks went and supported one of the rebellious Ionian colonies, the Athenians in particular, and they wanted to take revenge. There may have been a bit of that, but there had been rivalry for years and years over oil, control of the oil trade within the Eastern Mediterranean. Greeks controlled it. The Persians wanted a bigger cut of it. And at the time they still had some access to it, and control over that trade, a limited one through the vassal states of the Ionian Peninsula. Well, Ionia is basically where Turkey is today. It's the west coast along the Aegean, through there. That part is basically used to be called Ionia, and basically from that area they used to trade. But these oil wars over resources and stuff like that, quite involved in that regard. The Athenians won, and they controlled large of it through the Delian League, which was what we call the Athenian Empire, but it was called the Delian League then, because the treasury was in Delos in the Cyclades, and pretty much they controlled that trade for a very, very long time. And that's what basically it was used for, lighting. In the Hellenistic period, this is post-Alexander the Great, we have basically where we've got a lot of spices and a lot of different foods coming in from India, Persia, and all these other areas, exotic areas, as they were considered by the Greeks. And that's when you have more plants being introduced into the diet of the Greeks, because I've done the isotope stuff on the ancient Greeks. If you can go and look at them, and that is basically in the classical era, or in the pre-classical era, and even in the classical era, there was pretty much, it was more animal-based foods, as you can see from those studies. But when we move into the post-Hellenistic era, when it comes to Athens and many of these cities, they become more cosmopolitan. They're taking in a lot of, and at that time, they're starting to use olive oil to combine with some of these spices to make certain, with vinegar, vinaigrettes or stuff like that. They're creating these, you could say the first type of European sauces in a sense. And the Romans later on, not to be outdone, they actually use rapeseed oil, which is, the stuff that actually, we talk about toxic vegetable oils, rapeseed oil. The difference is that rapeseed oil, when produced in the traditional way with stones and all that, you can get very little. It's very expensive. Even today, there's a company in California that produces some of it. It's organic, cold pressed and all that, and it's very expensive. But it's still unstable. But if it's the Romans, then they just used to produce it and consume it. So it didn't have enough time to become, to oxidize and get really bad like today's stuff. But today's stuff goes through a refinery, which gets stripped of all its protections, just complete garbage and destroyed, and added, and all the hydrogens are basically loaded up with the deuterium. So it's a different thing. It's because of the industrial process that actually has this effect on basically affecting those protons. The hydrogen isotopes are basically altered because of the different process, but doesn't happen in sort of the traditional cold pressed method, so to speak, is what I'm trying to say, without going too much into detail before no, it wasn't the Hittites either. They were, not that group either. Starts with an M for Mary, yes. And where was I? So pretty much, they were just using it for those sort of purposes. But to a large extent, olive oil was unrefined. It was heavy, because you didn't, and it was used, for a number of purposes. It was even used for lubricants, in those days, for chariots and stuff like that, and different things like that. So it's been used for a lot of different things. I mean, wheeled chariots had to use it. I mean, even another reason why the Indo-Europeans sort of invaded was because they had chariots and all that. They were using, some sort of fats, but dairy fats and all that. But they were, they weren't as. They heard that these people had certain plant-based oils which they could use to improve the sort of the functioning and less breakdowns of some of their chariot systems. So, all this sort of stuff. So I'm not saying that was the reason why they invaded, but, they traded with these people and got some of this material. So there was a bit of the ongoing trade between, so they knew of them or whatever. But that's what it was used for. It wasn't used for cooking. The explosion of olive oil, let me just bring you up to date. After the Second World War, Greece was decimated. It was when they look at Greece, ask any economists, Greece was the most destroyed country in Europe in terms of population, in terms of resources. Even Russia, per capita, that is, per the amount of humans in the country, had less destruction to it. Plus, the Germans took out a war loan. Hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people died from starvation. More people died from starvation than a bullet in Greece at the time. So that's how bad and how destroyed the country was. That's why it's taken a long time for the country to recover, because of that destruction. And we didn't get the sort of money lavished to this is how crazy. The Americans, with their Marshall Plan and all that, gave far more money to the Germans to rebuild them than they gave to Southern Europe and all that, in particular Greece. So, I'm going, yeah, great allies. So where did they give the money? They basically wanted Greece to be a dependent state. That's the reason why. They just treated us like a third world country nearly at the time. So they pretty much came in and said, because all the animals had been confiscated by the Germans, and when they retreated, they took the animals with them. So the country was left bare. It's, you're probably up in the mountainous regions. There were some animal stock still left here and there, but the majority in the lowlands, forget it. There was nothing left. It was only in the rebel-held areas that you still had some animals that survived. And it was really from those sort of that livestock that Greece was able to, over time, to rebuild a lot of its animals, So animals that were hidden, so the Germans couldn't get them. And the reality is that the country was absolutely decimated at the time, and pretty much Greece has never been compensated for that. There have been never anything of the sort. All these other, France and all these other countries got war reparations, and Greece got basically bugger all. Very nice of the Europeans. Yes, they've been really good European friends for a very long time. Yes, one should love them for the way they've treated us. Anyway, the thing is that, the people back then had no other option. They had olive trees all over the place, and the Americans came in and actually said, we'll finance the olive oil trade. So it was easy. It was easy to basically build up the production. It was much harder to build up the livestock again. It would take too long. So it was easy. They shipped in a whole lot of seed oils from America with refined sugars and a whole lot of other stuff. And then over time, we rebuilt a lot of the actual animal stocks in the country. But then olive oil became, was pushed, especially in the 70s by, all these organizations and all that, the olive oil trade. Ansel Keys was right behind it, because he basically lived in Italy and he was right behind all the olive oil industry. He was very closely associated with them, and he pushed like mad. Obviously pushed the other seed oils in. Olive oil is less deleterious, I agree, less problematic compared to the other seed oils, but it's still a plant oil, and it's not as bad as some of the other oils, and particularly because a lot of it's actually very low, has practically no refinement. It's extra virgin, or it's basically cold pressed, or it's basically has very low refinement. And so as a consequence, it's got less problems with it compared to, and it's just because at the time, Greece had less industry and they were still using a lot of traditional methods for olive oil extraction. And so even to this day, even though people have like modern machinery and all that, they still do it in a very traditional way. So they still use modern machinery to do what the old pressers used to do. So they still do a pressing system. So it's still quality-wise not as bad, but it's, is it species appropriate? No. Is it nutrient dense? Yes. Is it caloric? Is it calorically dense? Yes. Is it nutrient dense? No, because all plant fats have very low micronutrient density. So basically you could say they're all empty calories. Just some of them are more toxic than others. That's the only difference. But Greece is, in recent years, since the end of the war and in modern times, they've been using more and more olive oil because animal fats and all that have been demonized. And it's another reason why in the modern era, Greeks are more sicker than what they used to be in the past, like the rest of us. Not to the same degree, because they still consume more animal products than many other Europeans. But the younger people now, especially with the crisis and all that, and with all these woke ideas and protecting the planet and all that, they are embracing veganism. They are embracing these low-fat type approaches, and it's starting to get a bit of traction even in Greece. So not in the villages, but in the cities in particular, yes.
It seems to be always the cities. It doesn't.
What's happening in Brazil? Very similar, I suspect.
Yes, same thing, and it's weird because I've been seeing people actually posting about, "Oh, look, I got the new fake burger," and it's like it's
Yeah,
the same thing, but
exactly.
it's mostly like city folk. The more and more you go to the countryside, the less that type of thing. Uh, the less people believe in that type of thing. Oh, actually, here's a funny story. I met this lady recently, and she was telling me that she gained a lot of weight, and she's like trying to lose it. It's been several years. And I was talking to her, and she actually told me that she used to live in the countryside of central Brazil, and she gained weight when she moved to a city. I was like,
Exactly.
so like, what did you eat back then? She was, oh, I ate a lot of like salted and cured meats. It was like just basically
Exactly.
that.
Yeah, that's it. How can you can't, physical activity, and even if you have some carbs in that meal, you cannot put on weight. You cannot really
Yes.
derange yourself and all that and cause
Mhm.
an excess amount of energy and engage the Randall cycle. So it's just not possible. Even if you're having seasonal sugar and stuff like that, you get very little. Fructose is a bit funny. Fructose is a bit different. Fructose will basically drive a certain level because it uses the same pathway as alcohol. It will drive a certain level of fat production. Simple as that. It's just one of those things where glucose, isn't like that. But, most people, even in those environments, they would have a small amount. It was limited. It was basically limited. I need to find, because nobody's actually everybody's pointed to all these other populations other than the population that I'm trying to remember. Uh, well, not everybody's what do they say? A history buff. Um, I'm just really annoyed with myself that I can't bloody remember, to say the least. I usually have pretty good memory on most things. I can just off the cuff remember shitloads of stuff. It's just not Minoans. It's That's Crete. We're talking about the Levant. The Levant is, we're talking about, you know areas like Syria, Lebanon. These sort of, it's actually in Syria, the old Syrian area. Okay, let me find. Oops. Early pre Who was before the Sumerians? No, not that group. Oh, what is it with these? No, not the Ubad people.
I'm curious now. I
Yeah,
want to sleep.
I'm just trying to I'm looking at the
I should really get to sleep soon, but now I'm curious because I really want to know which group it is.
Mitanni. That's it. Mitanni. The Mitanni people. Mitani. Kingdom of Mitanni is the greatest extent. Okay. So, and it was basically their actual ancestors. Because what's the other groups? It's the Hurrian Mitanni. Temple vessel resembles oil lamp for burning incense and fumes. Yep, that's. I think that's a Turkish university that's actually done the research on them. No, actually, sorry, it's Bulgarian. Or no, it's Turkish. No, it's Turkish. What am I saying? So, which university is it? So it's a university in Turkey that basically talks about this population. Yep. So, yeah, they were the Mitanni. This population. They were the first to use, because prior to using olive oil, people were using basically animal fats for lanterns and stuff like that. But olive oil is much easier to transport. It's lighter. So you can get around. You can do more trade with it. So the Mitanni basically, but they used it in their temples and stuff like that. There's a Turkish study if anybody wants to read it. But they were basically the population. I just could not remember, you know. I knew it was that started with an M, and I'm going, oh, you know, my mind's just going. And I had to check. The way I actually found it is ancient tribes of the Levant. And they've got all the list of the ancient tribes of the Levant. And then Mitanni was the last one in that list. So
happens to the best of us.
Exactly. It's been a long time since I actually looked. And it's probably goes well. What is it? Probably the last time I actually was, looking into this population. We're talking about now nearly 20 years ago. It's not recent stuff that I've researched on the Mitanni. It goes way back. I'm trying to basically, remember something from 20 years ago. So it's, quite some time. Does tax the brain cells, even on a carny diet. Yes. Harry, have you considered the Orthodox Christian fasting cycle and its impacts on 2K years of civilization, essentially vegan half the year? Yeah, pretty much it is, because what the vegan diet is basically a fasting mimicking diet. That's what it is. That's why you can't do it forever. But it does have benefits, like all fasting, if you do it for limited periods of time. Even, yeah, they do it for half the year. That's true. So it's basically, but if you take a look at the sort of plants they're using, they're not plants like, we're talking about things like pumpkins and, and things like zucchinis. They do a lot of zucchini type foods, and there are certain things. There's a thing called agria horta. Now, translates as wild grass in English, but it's not really grass. It's basically a plant that looks a bit like spinach, but it's not spinach because it doesn't have the oxalate load that spinach has. It tastes completely different, nothing like spinach. It has a more bitter type taste, and you combine it with lemon juice. So you cook it up quite well, and then you basically combine it with lemon juice and some herbs like, garlic and things like that. And you cook that up and you basically have that. And that is basically, it's leafy greens. It's, as you said, leafy grass, it's basically leafy greens, but they are wild plants that have been domesticated, that come from the mountainous regions in Greece. And that's what my mother used to feed me on fasting days, on Greek Orthodox fasting days, because we weren't even allowed to have, in some cases, olive oil. So we had to basically, so nothing, no luxury. It's a fast. You're supposed to basically, you're not supposed to have, luxuries. Fasting is basically to basically, yes, it's a bit of suffering, in that regard. You could say an abstention of pleasure, of any foods of pleasure or whatever. So, but it basically means that the body, because, about half the year is fasting, really. My mother didn't get us to do a lot of the stuff because the priests basically are quite clear. They're saying kids that are growing should not fast, pregnant women should not fast, and lactating women should not fast. It's quite clear. They say only people who are adults should fast in that regard. But my mother used to basically, the foods that they used to make between dad and my mum for fasting, she used to basically give us some, and then in the evening she'd give us, a more. So we would do like a half day fast, and then she'd give us a proper meal in the evening, because she knew that we were growing children still. So in that regard, but it was, it was the way she was brought up. It's, she was very religious, my mother, in that regard. I mean, dad, a bit like me, sort of, we are religious, but we're not like, card carrying disciples sort of thing in that regard. Yes, I do. My faith is very important to me, but at the same time, I'm not out there, you could say, evangelizing and all that. My mother, on the other hand, was very, if there's anyone in our family that's going to end up an angel or whatever, or up there in the right in paradise, it's definitely going to be mum more than the rest of us. So let's put it that way. That's the sort of person. People that know my mother know the sort of kind-hearted person she was, and she never basically gossiped about other people. She was held in high regards by a lot of people in my community. Anybody that asks about my mother in the Greek Orthodox community down here in Tasmania, just say Anastasia Serpanos. She's passed away a number of years now, and they will tell you only good words about her. So she was one of those people, rare people in that regard. But, I mean, she made mistakes in her life as well. So, we're none of us are perfect, but she never did anyone any harm. so to speak. Never talked behind people's backs or gossiped or anything like that. So in that regard, many people that know her know it's the reason why. The funny thing was that most people, and I have that tendency because I don't gossip either, and a lot of people tell me their secrets, and my mother had the same thing. They told her a lot of secrets. And I have a thing that, I mean, you know me even with, people like that I have no relationship now that used to have and send me emails. I would never reveal anything that they had actually sent me unless I had to defend myself because they were basically putting out misinformation. That's a different thing altogether. But, doing it myself, even if I've got information on people, I would not, because it's wrong. That's my ethical base anyway when it comes to those things. It is absolutely wrong. And it's the reason why people trust me. They trust me because they know that basically they tell me something in confidence, it's not going to go any further. And it shouldn't, because it's the wrong thing to do. So I did pick up that characteristic from my mother as well. She was great. And she wasn't motivated. I mean, she had a good mind for business, far better than my father had. But like me, and I'd probably take after her in that department as well. The difference is, like me and her, we're not motivated by that. It's important to have security, but we're not motivated by that. Because when you motivate yourself only by that, by the riches of the world, as one would say, you lose part of your soul to the devil, as I say. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what you see, on YouTube here, the majority of, people out there, what are they? Selling products and trying to trick people into buying things. Some people want to make their money that way. Fair enough, but they're not going to get much respect from me, I can tell you. I think Ken Berry was saying galactose has multitudes higher glycation than glucose and warned against milk. He's wrong. First of all, milk is a lower deuterium sort of sugar, one. Second, to get to basically when glucose goes through into glycolysis, to basically through glycolysis. So glucose 6-phosphate first, then the next enzymatic pathway is fructose 6-phosphate and onwards down to pyruvate. The galactose has to go through 4 enzymatic pathways. So 50% of the lactose is galactose. The other 50% is glucose. That has to be converted to glucose. Galactose has to be converted to glucose through 4 enzymatic pathways. It doesn't get converted to fructose. Galactose is not fructose. Completely different. They even are processed and dealt enzymatically differently in the body. So I don't know where he's getting that information. If that was the case, why do the Maasai have some of the lowest levels of inflammation?
Precisely,
Why?
yes.
When we look at populations, this is the problem. Ken Berry unfortunately, sometimes he looks at some of this epidemiological garbage and he uses some of that. And a lot of other low-carb doctors I notice use epidemiological associational garbage. And they have a tendency to have some of this, what I call paleo-esque, dislike for milk.
Precisely, yes.
They probably need a bit of raw milk that would sort them out.
Uh-huh. Oh God. But I've noticed this before, and he seems to mention dermatological research, but I haven't checked his sources.
Look, let's put it this way. Though that research is highly confounded because the people that basically are consuming dairy products are consuming the commercial dairy products. And the second thing, they're also consuming a sad diet, the standard diet. So what is it? The standard diet or the lack of, or even the commercial milk? I don't believe even that, because there are a lot of people that don't have, that have a more carnivorous diet, that eat commercial milk and don't have any of those problems.
Yes.
And that, and we're not talking about, people that are carnivores. We're talking about people that just eat more animal products, that don't eat as much refined sugars and stuff like that, and they basically have none of these issues. I've known people like that. I used to be like that when I was very young in Greece, so I had the cleanest skin. I never had acne or anything until I basically got back to Australia and got into the carb-centric world. It's absolute garbage. From my own N of one experience as a youngster, consuming some carbohydrates in Greece, but primarily a more predominantly animal-based diet, and some pasteurized milk, because initially, you could only get goat milk from the village, which was unpasteurized raw, which occasionally we used to get. But a lot of the commercial milk by that stage was already starting to be pasteurized, not to the same heat levels as today. And you could still get some raw milk, but it was really hard and all that. It was a mixed bag. But, I never had any of those effects whatsoever. So as far as I'm concerned, it basically is all the other shit in the diet that are the confounding variables, to be honest. And obviously when you add, and this is the thing, the Randall cycle, when you add somebody who's doing a mixed diet, who's already low grade engaging the Randall cycle, and then you give that person milk on top, you're going to magnify, because of the extra protein, you're going to magnify, and the leucine in there. Remember, when you combine protein that is high in leucine, and we know that milk is, and we know that meat is, but when you combine that, you actually magnify a lot of the anabolism, and you magnify the insulin effect as well. It's like, have a McDonald's diet, and you can magnify it with sodas and everything else up to a ratio of 70. So your insulin to the glucagon in terms of ratio is 70-fold difference. That's the difference, how high insulin gets, and the glucagon is suppressed so severely. That's why you can't lose weight on such a diet at all, because you just can't tap into your fat stores. And that's why a lot of these people, sarcopenia, wasting away, and all these things in middle age and older life on these sad diets. That's the reality. But it's just slightly slower because they're getting slightly more protein than what the vegans are. They're just basically degrading at a much slower state, but they're getting more sicker because of engaging the Randall cycle and starving themselves of nutrients, and causing a lot of inflammation as well and stuff like that. So what is it? This is what I mean. These are not healthy populations where you've got a healthy population, too healthy, and you put one on meat and dairy, and see what happens. That's your gold standard, not basically a whole lot of unhealthy people. You throw in additional fuel to the flames. That means in terms of mixed macronutrients and all that, and engage the Randall cycle. And this is another thing. I don't think he understands the Randall cycle. Most of them don't. They're in the paradigm that sugar is bad, and the other group on the other side is fat is bad. And they don't either understand the Randall cycle. And in their own bubble, they think they're right, because low fat and low carbs both get really good results, because they disengage the Randall cycle. They upregulate a whole lot of pathways like AMPK. Yeah, even a vegan diet will actually increase AMPK, traditional vegan diet, low-fat diet will increase, and uncoupling mitochondria, which means you basically radiate away heat. You don't even take up that energy. So we're talking about these same mechanisms are activated in both states. Most people don't understand that. And when you combine a lot of energy surplus and what your body requires of mixed macros, then you basically affect the uptake and blockade those things. Tracy's telling you to go to bed.
Somehow, even though I'm not used to being awake at this time anymore, I am feeling great. Like, I know that if I lie down, I'll sleep, but I'm just feeling so lively right now. It's been weird this last week.
He had a bit of mummy's milk earlier. I think that's
I think it's the
yeah,
liver.
probably is. Look, liver is one of those foods that I get. I think because it does work really well synergistically with the other fat soluble vitamins, and that's by putting some of those elements in. And I think it's really important to get a lot of these different also micronutrients. It's the reason why I'm really hostile about a steak only diet. It's like, as I say, like we say to the vegans, show me, one population. Yes, I think that you can actually get shitloads of nutrition from meat. Don't get me wrong. But at the same time, there are certain people with certain genetics, like myself, choline, very important because I don't have the certain conversion parameters, that people that have some of those susceptibilities really need to actually eat a much wider variety of foods. Then the other thing is when it comes to basically the methylation part, you definitely need things that are much higher. You need, so if you're having an average amount of meat, you may not get that excessive amount of riboflavin you need. If you're having a big steak, like like certain carnivores consume far more, 600 grams or whatever. It's like what I had yesterday. I had basically about 600 grams of lamb. Oh, that was nice. Absolutely nice. Which is basically, let me just calculate it. 600 grams.
I never thought I would be eating like 8 eggs a day sometimes. It's insane.
Oops. Which is about 21 ounces. Well, 16, it's about 1.3 pounds of lamb that I had yesterday. And I had some cheese and a couple of other things and a couple of eggs and all that. So yeah, I really getting the levels of riboflavin and a glass of milk. So I get more than enough riboflavin to support that other methylation pathway. But some people may have a lactose intolerance, so they can't drink milk, so they can't get that extra, riboflavin, and they may have some issues with, like that tick issue, so you got to look at other food varieties. So, and there's also the choline side of things where you need more eggs and liver and stuff like that to get choline. So, and there's also existing underlying deficiencies that people come, so it's best to actually mix the stuff. And then there is pregnancies that require more nutrients. So there's a lot of different things, that require it that way. Yes, exactly. To a large extent. And that's exactly, that's the galactose thing. Yeah, so I'm just, what are these people reading? They're not reading mechanistic studies. They're not reading exactly what the biochemistry shows, the body converting these sort of things and doing with these things. They're basically looking at these epidemiological studies that are looking at people eating milk and then going, oh, it's worse. And going, what else are they eating with that milk? Let's do a real proper comparison. We don't. Yes. Yes, exactly. It's epidemiological. I can't even say it. Bart says it so well.
Yeah. Well, in that regard, I think I'll get going, Harry.
Yes, get to bed, because you can always come in for the early session when Bart's around.
Oh yeah. Oh god.
Exactly.
We'll see.
Remember that, because he hasn't come. I sent him both links. He said, "Send me the links. I'll see what happens," because he's going to go for a walk with Pim. So he didn't know when he was going to go. She may have said, "We're going now," so basically he had to go then. And because sometimes when it's good weather, you want to go. It's like on yesterday, I was looking. It was raining, and then it stopped raining, and I'm going. Then I called Sean and I go, "What do you think?" He said, "Let's go." I said, I'll be there in 5 minutes. So, because it's just down the road here. So basically, took off, ended up down there, and we went for our walk. But it kept right through the day, but I was concerned that it may fall apart again. So I had my raincoat on all day, but didn't have to really use it. But I couldn't be bothered carrying it, so I kept it on. It's a very light one, so it's not a heavy raincoat. So it's one of when you go out walking or jogging or stuff like that, you don't want anything heavy. So it's one of those light ones. So it didn't make much of a difference in that. Anyway, get to bed, young man.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, nice to be here once again, and I hope I could add to the show as always.
There's always little things here and there that about Brazil and about other things and all that, and your memes and all that. There's a lot of materials there and all that. Look, we'll probably have a chat. There's probably a couple of things that we could probably do in the future, a video collaboration on certain things. So I'll have a bit of a chat with you and see what you think. And then you can post some stuff on your channel as well and get that going.
Yes,
at some stage as well. So let me give you some creative ideas.
For sure, Eric.
Anyway, thanks for being here, mate. I enjoy it. Say goodbye to the lovely people here, and I'll let you go.
All right. Well, nice to be here as always, and stay well, everyone. Take care of yourselves and your friends and family, and enjoy the show. I'll see you later.
See you, mate. Okay, I remember reading 50 years ago, the areas with hard water had fewer sudden deaths amongst alcoholics due to the presence of magnesium. Yes. Because people basically, they do deplete, and it's not only magnesium, B vitamins are absolutely annihilated. The liver will go through a lot of B vitamins. It's the reason for your hangover. One, dehydration. The other is loss of B vitamins, because without B vitamins, your body can't detox. That's another part. I know I shouldn't say this, but I've said it before. When I have had in the past a bender, I usually take 2 B vitamin complex. I make sure that they do not have cyanocobalamin, that they have methylcobalamin, none of that garbage, and methylfolate, and not too much of methylfolate. And all the others in a good range. And I usually take 2 before and 2 after when I get back half inebriated. And I usually have at that stage, I used to have like a glass of water and stuff like that. Nowadays, I usually just drink some, drink some cream. I know, it's crazy. And then I have a bit of water because I need to flush it all down, because it doesn't, until it gets to a certain temperature, it doesn't flow as well. And after that, I go to bed and I wake up in the morning, no hangover whatsoever, because the B vitamins basically are providing enough of the cofactors for the detox system to work. And I also do throw in like choline as well, 1 gram of choline, because choline also helps the export of fat out of the liver. Very good. So you don't end up with, because will deplete choline as well, because part of the methylation. So you'll lose a lot, and it's a quick supplement you can throw in and just go, ooh, good. So yes, for those alcoholics out there, it's one thing that I've sort of stopped doing on a regular basis nowadays. I've sort of limited to retirement parties and birthdays and stuff like that. So, and function, like work functions. So in the last probably couple of months, I've just basically had 2 indiscretions in that period. One was a retirement party, and the other one was a work function. Cream equals hangover cure. Wouldn't go that far. Do not quote me. I'm just trying to get the hydration from the fat. Yeah, I know, it's crazy. Yeah. Just stick to the B vitamins. That's the most important part. You can still get hydration from your own fat. Anyway, do you have a video about deuterium? No, I don't. I've talked about it ad libitum, but I'm planning to make something. Not right now. I've still got a whole lot of other things that I'm trying to get out. I do have a day job, and so I don't have the luxury of basically being able to produce as other people do. So I usually just produce the occasional, and I do have what is it now? I think it's over 150 video ideas and all the material there. A whole lot of PDFs and stuff like that, and links. So I've got a text file with all my links. So I can actually then provide those links. That's what I do. I just use a text file. I'll actually show you. Come on. Usually have my one there opening up. Yeah, let me just find it. Video clips. And I'll just show you, I might as well just show you the most recent one. This is what my folders usually look like. Not all of them, but usually. So basically, there's all the PDF studies. There's the image, there's the video, and there's the info sheet. So you can open up. So that ends up as the header, the title, and that ends up in the description, all the references. So that's how I do it, basically. So I've got the stuff. So obviously you can't. I don't use that. Sometimes I do use those, but sometimes I just use the references, stuff like that. Obviously, I can sometimes get access to some of this stuff, and I've tended to use the abstractions primarily nowadays because I don't want the videos becoming too long. People want to go and read them. The key thing is just to point out the obvious stuff and to basically attack the bullshit and stuff like that without making the videos too bloody long. I'm trying to, even the recent one was a bit, I'm trying to contain them to less than about 30 odd minutes. Even that one sort of grew to 46 going. And that was after my actual third attempt. First attempt was over an hour. Second attempt came down, and even that, I gave up after that. That was it. There's just so much information. Sometimes I want to give it, but then I'm trying to work out how to basically sort of concise it. It's not a bloody easy thing to do, I can tell you. Anybody that's actually that's ever done, probably the rest of you guys that have not done this sort of stuff don't understand what I mean. But anybody on YouTube that's actually done a YouTube video, it's really hard to put stuff together, to be able to provide sufficient information to explain things to people. And even then, when I try to do them concise, I still have multiple questions that come after. There's so many elements that you can't cover completely. It's just basically really hard. You're welcome, Jin. What I'm trying to do is demystify a lot of things. The whole value of my channel is no BS, no bullshit. It's basically to point out, I don't have to prove anything. I'm not trying to prove anything in that regard. All I'm trying to do is saying, these people, a whole lot of people are saying this sort of stuff. I can show you evidence that's completely different. I only have to show you one study that shows a difference to prove, not to prove, but to disprove the others. And it has to be a good quality study, not some bullshit, epidemiology, observation, or sort of, things that are not controlled. It has to be mechanistic, showing mechanism, demonstrating that if you do this, like a cause and effect sort of scenario, or a very strong inference, there are two differences. Cause and effect is basically replicatable, high precision replicatable results. So you get them in physics. So if I can get like, let's say four basically pencils, and just stick the pencils together, and then shine a light through them, and then you'll get that the sort of interference pattern you get in sort of the quantum effect. So I don't need like a special laser, special mirrors and stuff like that. I can create those interference effects in that regard, where they go down the two slits, one. So I can do that pattern, exactly what somebody can do. That is replicatable truth. Anybody can do that, can do the experiment and actually prove a specific quantum effect. But a lot of the claims, so that is something which I call like empirical truth, which is replicatable truth. Anybody can do the experiment, come up with the same result. Time dilation, put an atomic clock leave an atomic clock on the planet, put one on a plane, fly it around, and because that is actually moving at a high speed, it actually, unless you're going in the opposite direction of the planet's orbit, its rotational orbit, and actually goes in the different direction in terms of, but we won't go into the complexities of time dilation, but just think, if you're going in that one direction in the same way as the planet is rotating, you are moving, the atomic clock is moving at a faster velocity in relation to the atomic clock on the planet. All of it's still moving through interstellar space, but we won't go into the complexities of that. But the reality is that can be replicated by you, me, any scientist, over and over again, getting the same result. That is cause and effect, absolute empirical truth. Okay, it's like 1 + 1 = 2. But everything else is an inference of different degrees of certainty. That means we're inferring causality. We're not proving causality. That means the likelihood that it could be anything else is unlikely. So that's where I look at research which actually infers strong mechanistic. It explains mechanistically how this works, or it shows that you're only looking at one single factor, that it's very controlled, and you can actually say, look, this is quite clear that when, if somebody's fasted completely, you've got a washout, fasted and whatever, and somebody says leucine does not drive muscle protein synthesis, if you look at that study, and then I show somebody being given just leucine, and they get the muscle protein synthesis even in a fasted way, not to the same level if you've got a lot of other amino precursors that can be driven to. But even in the fasted state, as I said, the autophagy is sort of like a pulsatile thing. You're releasing organelles, all the damaged stuff, into the bloodstream because of autophagy, and that shuts off autophagy, and that stuff can be taken up. And if you add leucine in there, you can drive muscle protein synthesis much higher as a consequence, because you've got some of those amino precursors from the fast. But somebody who's fasted without leucine, Won't get much of that. And that's the difference, demonstrating that even in an environment where glucagon is higher and insulin is suppressed, you add leucine in there, it drives muscle protein synthesis. You don't need sugar. You don't need high insulin. You just need leucine. 2.6 grams at a minimum. You can get that with animal foods. Very easy. Thank you very much. But that is the sort of stuff that I'm looking for, mechanistic stuff that show quite clear. Like the study with the rats, people talk, the MyPoofa stuff. You give bacon, you induce cancer, colon cancer to rats. And then you give them all these different foods, but one, you give them bacon, processed meat. Oh, how horrible, how horrifying. And the bacon is protective. So here it's completely controlled. There is no other foods in the food supply. They're just eating bacon and nothing else. And we don't see that problem. That's the sort of stuff. That is what Bart would call a study a 1 or a 0, telling you fuck all. A 1, highly confounded. A 1 basically is replicatable, come up with the same result. That is a mechanistic study that with strong statistical, it's nearly close to, proving cause and effect. That's how good it is. People could argue, there could be some genetic differences between these rats and other rats, so that's where some of the other elements come in. That is why it's not like, gold plated, but it's the next thing. It's highly statistically significant in thousands of fold of, of confidence in terms of inference of causality. Inference. Okay, the word is. And that is the difference of the sort of stuff that I put out to people. And that's hard to basically debate against or argue against, because it's rock solid. You can take these rats, you can induce this, and you can give them bacon and get the same result anywhere in the world. And that's the nice thing. That is what is high quality science. And that's the stuff that I use. And that's the stuff that I base my arguments, my opinions, my views on. It's the reason why you guys come to me for no bullshit, because you really want to know, does this actually work, or is somebody pulling the wool over your head with garbage and using epidemiology and using all this associational claptrap to basically bullshit you? If I can show you something that doesn't actually stand up, it means that it's either a maybe, then it becomes a maybe. And then when I show you something that is not a maybe, but it's replicatable, then you go, yes, you've got something solid here that they don't have. And that's the difference. And it doesn't matter whether it's an old study. If you're giving basically something to an animal, you can do it now, you can do it in the past, you can do it in the future. In 100 years, you'll get the same result. That's good science. Most of the stuff there, 99% of the stuff out there is questionable and poor. But that's what most people gravitate towards, because they like they like to put up the big signs, the big, statements. It's like the media, the same shit. They'll say, oh, this is good one year, bad the next year. It's all this sort of claptrap associational nonsense. It's basically clickbait. It's garbage. It doesn't really help you. Why go to that? And even beyond the current studies, even if I didn't look at any of these studies at all, I completely ignored that. Just look at the archaeology. Millions of years of hominins that basically only ate the flesh of animals. And they had high isotope N15, in their collagen of their bones. That tells me that we were super hyper carnivores for most of our existence. So why would I basically really give a shit what some fucking vegetarian academic comes up with, some fabricated adjusted data? Because that's the sort of stuff, the Ray Peats and all that, they just come up with shit. They just make up shit. Anybody can do reductionist science or adjust things or throw things in that basically throw a spanner in the works and make things look a certain way or whatever. That's all they do. This is what me and Bart do, that we pull these apart and we go and expose these charlatans, and there are plenty of them. And they are stealing your health and they are stealing your money. That's what they're doing. They are criminals. That's why we call them misanthropists and criminals. We don't do it, just flippant, in a flippant way. I know I'm getting a bit serious, but this needs to be said. We do it in a proper way. We point out these indiscretions. We point out their behavior. I mean, if Bart wanted to basically be like these people, get the money and do the shit studies and all that, he would have stayed in academia. He left academia because he was disgusted with the corruption of academic, and the lack of academic freedom. That's why he left, because a whole lot of vegetarded and, carb eating people like the Ray Peats of the world, these people basically run academia, and they are handsomely rewarded by food companies like, the Coca-Cola brothers and a whole lot of other people like that. And they've corrupted the research in order to sell this highly refined garbage to the population. And they are killing you, that in the past they were, and your family members. And they are basically degrading the entire human race. So it's an appalling situation, but that's the reality. That's what we live in. Now, you guys come here for, to get questions from me and Bart, about your health issues, and we'll help you as much as we can. We'll try and steer you to stick to a more species appropriate diet so you can maintain good health, which is very important in that regard. But it's, we can only do so much. We're little minions. We're little minor players in this crazy world, and we don't have the same traction. But we'll help as many people as we can. We'll try and steer them in the right direction, give them the best information, and also pull apart the junk. I mean, Bart and me know really what the sort of stuff. I mean, I've made suggestions that what we should be promoting, or through some sort of social movement or social media movement, maybe even, and encourage, to find volunteer prisoners, give them some benefits. So they have to sign up to a contract to get on a specific diet for all the years that they're incarcerated, like doing something like, the lifers or people that are in jail for a very long time, and give them the opportunity to give back to society voluntarily, not coerced or pushed or anything like that. Where you feed them different diets for multiple decades, and we can actually work in a controlled environment. It's not perfect, but it's the most controlled you could get in a jail. And then we could actually compare a lot of these diets. I know what would actually come out of it. I mean, I just looked at the Atkins diet in the A to Z study. It was the best out of all of them. So what do you think? After 1 year, it'll go bad? No, it'll actually probably maintain the same level or get better, because it's species appropriate. That's what our bone collagen shows us. That's what all that information, archaeological information, shows us. So I know what but it still needs to be played out so the majority of the population knows, because right now they're being manipulated and they don't know. That's why that sort of study would be much better. It would prove. But a few more decades, people would have to suffer until that information came, and it'd probably come in at the right time before we really damage the human species, like Pottinger's cats sort of scenario. So that's the sort of thing. I'll just shut down all these folders and stuff that I've got open, filling up my screen, so to speak. But that's the sort of stuff that, Bart tries to do, is try to demystify a lot of things for you guys, try to help you guys realize your own potential, your own sort of how to get around a lot of these health problems that that are plaguing so many people. I know it's hard. It's a difficult environment that we find, and you've also got a lot of pushback from relatives, from from friends. It's never ending. I forgot about this one. This was one that Lukey made as well. This is one last week I forgot to actually show. I'll put that on as well. I'm getting close to the end anyway, but I'll just put it quickly on. That one is Lukey's. So it goes, all right, I'm a long-term carnivore and I want to bodybuild now. And he's a manager, see, in some sort of walk, and he goes, cheat and use powders, one of them says. The other one says, add back carbs. And then a person that probably, the wiser one, just eat more eggs, meat, and dairy. And he gets kicked out the window. That's the sort of crazy world we live in. That you get that sort of response. It's a sort of the Paul Saladino this sort of thing. I better just save that before I lose it. That was another one that he actually gave me. Now, I know, I just noticed Tracy. Thanks, Tracy. I appreciate it. You actually asked something about in the BART one. Was it liver? Was it liver enzymes? What did you ask? I think it was liver enzymes. Like, I just can't remember. I think it was. You're asking about liver enzymes in particular. What exactly? Just quickly, because I'm not too far away from shutting down because I'm going to be out of here. But just remind me, liver enzymes. But in regards to what? So let me just ask you one quick question, just, because we may know. So, okay. So alkaline phosphatase is up from 71 to 100. Okay. You know what that's related to? Gallbladder inflammation. Yes. You've got, you've basically, you got issues with your gallbladder, basically. A lot of people that were ex-plant-based, look, I've gone through it as well, and I had to use taurine to emulsify and to basically try and clear it out. It's you may have it being backed up in that regards. So, and the thing is, if I usually, the main thing that I look at what is called the ALP, the alkaline phosphatase. It usually tells me no inflammation confirmed, 18 months carnivore. Yeah, that's strange, because usually that is normally elevated from that sort of stuff. The only other thing that I can think that could actually interfere with that is pancreatitis. Has been known, because if you had a gallbladder issue in the past, you may have a lot of sludge, and that sludge will not show up on an ultrasound. It's because of the contrast. So it's something that I've still got low grade of, and I occasionally. Is your feces sometimes yellowy occasionally? Yes or no? What I'm saying is, do you get some yellowy, very lighter colored feces occasionally? Never. Okay, that's because that's usually a telltale sign that it is sludge. So you don't have sludge and all that. Okay. Was added. Only change 18 months carnivore was added sunflower lecithin for a few weeks. That shouldn't basically cause that sort of effect. It basically shouldn't. That's There can be other things that actually cause. There are other causes of inflammation as well, in that regard. Um, Other things that I can think of off the top of my head, because I'm just about to go, um, you can actually have a low grade like like fatty liver, and this could be for two reasons. The fatty liver. The fatty liver could be basically because you're not getting enough choline in the diet to export fat, or you may have also an issue with, well, an omega-6 could be an issue if you've got a poor conversion of omega-6s into arachidonic acid. There are some people that have got some genetics there, so it could be a problem. Just try and cut out, lower the omega-6s as much as possible and see whether that, because you may have a genetic thing. It's a small group of people that do have that problem, but it does exist, and that's one thing. There are two other factors that I can think of. A low choline diet, but I suspect you're getting enough eggs and stuff like that, so you should be getting enough choline to export fat. So that mostly, but there is another possibility is fibrotic tissue. So from past life, alcohol and many other things, you may have a lot of fibrotic tissue. And that fibrotic tissue, it's probably a good thing that you did. A lot of fibrotic tissue, that can also be a problem. Eggs, you're getting enough choline. That's current, but you still can have prior damage to your liver, slightly cirrhotic. That doesn't heal very easily. So if you've got prior, and then you add, because then you add a lot of, in particular fats and all that need to basically be metabolized and need to be dealt with, that can slightly have an effect. Only 6 months ago. That's a bit weird. That is a bit weird, because basically if you had fibrotic tissue, that should have appeared much earlier. Okay, let me think about it. I've covered most points. Yeah, go back. It could have been a bad reading or contamination, or it could have been a lot of things. There can be other factors as well that can actually increase. There can be like pathogens in the environment. It's new. There can be pathogens in the environment like mold and things like that can have an effect on the detox pathway, especially if you've got poor detox genes. I've known people that have basically never had a problem, and then their enzymes have shot up, and they've got poor detoxification capacity in their genetics. When they've done genetic tests, I've looked at the single nucleotide polymorphisms, and yeah, mold can be a thing. And basically, it can be if it's in your environment. And once they cleared up the mold, or they actually moved to another place, the problem went away. So yeah, there's a lot of different things that can actually affect the body. It's just one of those things. I just cleared a room with mold in it. How long was that? Weren't you wearing a mask and stuff like that? Or, you really have to be careful when you're dealing with mold and stuff like that. Look, another way of actually dealing with it very fast is ivermectin. Ivermectin can clear out the effects of mold out of your system. So, about the same time as a test. Okay, that makes sense. Old house, yep. Can you access ivermectin? Tracy, are you able to access ivermectin where you are? Or will your doctor basically give you a prescription? Or can you find another doctor that will, is what I'm trying to say. Because ivermectin, you would have to take 12 milligrams of ivermectin for, find out. You have to take, because you need ivermectin And look, if he basically, gives you a bit of a hard time and all that, just send me an email and I'll send you some information you can pass on, and hopefully that will convince your doctor to, to be a bit more lenient and all that. Let me. Very hard in Australia. It's this place drives me up the wall. I've been trying to get basically. It's not an easy thing in that regard. The email address is on the About page, my About page. If you go to the YouTube channel, the About page, I don't know. I'll get it. Just give me a sec, and I'll grab it right now, and I'll put it in the stream. Yeah, mold can be a problem. I usually go for the low hanging fruit, which is, the traditional stuff, which is gallbladder and stuff like that, fibrotic tissue, and, and especially people, consuming alcohol and stuff like that. Yes, but give me a sec because I can bring it up immediately. I don't have to put since I'm the owner. And this one here is a very safe email address account. Proton Mail, Serpanos at protonmail.com. It's safe because basically it's in Switzerland and it's protected by law for privacy. So they encrypt their system, which means nobody can access your information anywhere in the world. It's the reason why I use Proton Mail, because it's secure. No intelligence force, no police force, nobody can actually get to your information. No, and in particular for you guys are all, law-abiding citizens. I suspect the majority of you, good people. Good old Swiss, exactly. But the good thing about it is that it's secure as an email system. It's encrypted, and it means that, in particular, the nasty, big pharma and the insurance companies can't get to these accounts and get the information from the Googles of the world or whatever else, and basically, know more about you than you know about yourself. Very important. Yeah, let me. Look, I know the Novavax one is really the one that grew me. I wasn't expecting that. I was just doing that as for my subs as a contribution to help them out, to provide them with options, because they were scared, they were being pressured at work and all that. Which way to go? Usually for respiratory infections, if you maintain a good vitamin D status, you're fine. But there was the issue with some people; their employment was at risk. And I was sort of concerned about them, and that's why I sort of did that. But it was a sort of a one thing out there that everybody was concerned about, the spikes and all that, and it just, I've never had it exploded to about 4,000, over 4,000 likes, views now. I wish there were more likes, but anyway, one cannot have anything. But it like Lemmy and the many others, it's brought you guys to this little humble channel, and I hope you get something out of it in that regard. That's look, not a problem, Tracy. You're welcome. So, I mean, I actually encourage other people to basically use Proton Mail because we want to grow it. It's a secure email server in Switzerland, encrypted. So yes, make sure you basically have a way of getting notifications, or to basically reset your account or stuff like that, because if you forget your password, you'll never get in, and they can't get in either. So they basically tell you that do not forget your password. If you do, you've lost everything. You can't access anything anymore. So keep that in mind, So I also have like a memory stick that basically I have, and I use a small container, an encrypted container. I've got all my passwords and all that. And I also have a memory stick with the same container. So if anything, and so I've got all my passwords everywhere. So if any system goes down or whatever, I've got the stuff secured somewhere to basically get access to it. So I'll leave that up to you guys how you do it. That's your business. But yeah, that's keeping that in mind. I'm still investigating on being able to access ivermectin, because there are a whole lot of people that have taken in Australia the Pfizer and Moderna and some of these sort of vaccines. The younger people, and I'm concerned about them. And ivermectin is going to be very important with vitamin D to basically deal with long COVID symptoms that are going to come out. And I need to provide people with options without having to go to naturopaths and being basically, let's say, having to fork out a lot of money for stuff that people should be able to access themselves. And you guys can basically take that information to your own communities, to your own loved ones, friends and family, and try and get them, because eventually, these things will become pronounced. Some people will basically, because they're sick, they're getting sick on bad diets and all that, they probably won't notice it. They'll probably just think I'm just getting sicker and older. But others will investigate and start finding that, or changing their diet and it doesn't really work, and going, what's happening here? So I'm a conscientious objector. No, what you should basically say, remember the thing that joke, that guy that actually walked into an establishment and said, I identify as masked. You should say you identify as jabbed. That will weird them out. Go all woke on them. Human rights and woke identifies as jabbed. That'll be the new slogan. I'm in the control group. Anyway, guys, I better get out of here, because I should have been somewhere else, about 15 minutes ago. I'm late. Anyway, thanks for being here. Appreciate it. And look forward to seeing some of you lovely people tonight in about less than 4 hours from now, which is the Eurasian live stream. Anyway, take care. See you guys. What is it in England? If you're vegan, you don't have to get jabbed. Oh, God. One can only laugh. One can only laugh. Two rats walked in a bar and said to the other, have you taken the jab yet? The other said, I'm waiting for the human test results. Oh, Livy, that's a perfect one. Absolutely perfect. God, I got to use that at work. That is brilliant. Thanks, mate. I appreciate it. Anyway, see you guys. Take care, and chat with some of you people later.